Welcome to the supplementary hearing of the Portfolio Committee Number 3 Education Inquiry into Budget Estimates 2024 to 2025. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of lands on which we're meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today or watching online. My name is Abigail Boyd and I am chair of this committee. Today the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for the portfolios of education and early learning. I ask everyone in the room to please turn their mobile phones to silent. Parliamentary privilege applies to witnesses in relation to the evidence they give today. However, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of the hearing. I urge witnesses to be careful about making comments to the media or to others after completing their evidence. In addition, the Legislative Council has adopted rules to provide procedural fairness for inquiry participants. I encourage committee members and witnesses to be mindful of these procedures. Welcome. Thank you very much for making the time to give evidence. I'd like to remind all of you that you do not need to be sworn, as you have already been sworn before this committee during this inquiry. Today's hearing will be conducted from 9:15am to 1pm, with a 15-minute break at 11am. During this session, there will be questions from the opposition and crossbench members only, and then 15 minutes allocated for government questions at 10:45am and 12:45pm. We will begin with questions from the opposition.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being back here with us again. And just on behalf of the committee, just pass on our best wishes to Mr. Rooming. I understand he's not well, so we hope he's on the mend. And we look forward to seeing him in February. I wanted to start with some questions, possibly through you, Mr. Disdar, but maybe to Mr. Martin because it's within his division. Mr. Graham. Sorry, wrong, Martin. Mr. Graham, in the last estimates when we were with you in September, we were asking some questions in relation to the teaching, learning and student wellbeing division of the department. There was some media about restructures and positions that were going. Would you be able to give us an update on where that work is up to? And I'm happy for either or both of you.
Yeah, I'll let... good morning to the committee and thanks for acknowledging Sean Romney, our Deputy Secretary, who's on the People Group side. He did want to be here, but he's not well at all. Mr. Graham can give you the details. Mm-hmm. We've been working to align that division to make sure it's in line with the Plan for Public Education, with the election commitments of this government. And more to the point, there was overlap and duplication of expertise in that area. I think what's really important to highlight, and then Mr. Graham can give you the numbers, is that there was concern that we would be removing people from their role who were on the teacher side, what we call non-school-based teaching staff, and in fact we'll have well over 1,000 non-school-based teaching staff in that area, despite returning some back to their substantive position in schools. It's not well understood out there. It's understood well on the school side that those roles always have an end date, that there's secondments from the school gates, normally for a period between 1 to 3 years. So in the natural course of education delivery, there's always people that come from the school gates and return back to the school gates.
Okay. So Mr. As you know, limited time. At the last estimates hearing back on notice, we were told that a net 245 of the NSBT positions out of a total of 1,296 would be impacted. Are they still the numbers, or has that changed?
I'll get Mr. Graham to give you,
if we can get the detail.
To give you the number, but there's only a net reduction in that division, and he'll correct me if I've got it wrong. A net reduction of 37.4 roles.
Okay, can I get some
GSE
specifics?
roles.
Yep. So since we last met, we put out our consultation draft of our new structure, and that contained the number of new positions. We had an enormous amount of feedback from our staff. As a result of that, we went back through and we looked at every area, looked at the positions that we'd need. And so when we came back with our final structure, there was a net reduction of 218 NSBT positions, the non-school-based teaching service positions, and 37 GSE positions.
Okay.
So
in your division, and I appreciate what Mr. Disdar said about this being a government commitment, but prior to this restructure, I'll use that terminology, how many positions were there within your specific division? And how many are there now?
So there were 2,464 positions.
Yeah.
And in the division and in the parts of the division that moved elsewhere but are still the staff, 2,209.
Okay.
So that's the reduction of 218 non-school based teaching service staff and 37 GSE staff.
Okay. And of those 208, well, I'll start with the non-school based. Have they all gone back to substantive roles in schools?
So some of those positions were vacant, so it is a bit of it's not exact match like for like, but there are a number of people who decided, actually I'm not going to seek a new position in the structure. Like teaching, I'm going to go back to my school. And then there were some people who were unsuccessful in a role. So all of those people have now been informed. We've completed that process. So they're in the process of either going back to their substantive role or being matched with a school-based position.
Okay. Is anyone leaving altogether? Have you had any people take up a redundancy package?
No, there's no redundancy packages because they are temporary roles mostly, the non-school-based teaching service roles. I think there are a number of people, a small number of people I understand who are saying, well, look, I was close to retirement anyway. I'm going to take this as an opportunity, to retire.
Okay. And I'm happy for you to take it on notice. If there's a breakdown of those positions, how many will be still within the department or intending, and how many are actually leaving the employment? And again, happy for you to take that on notice. I don't expect you to have that.
Can I just stress that all 218 of those positions, given Mr. Graham said some were vacant, those that were substantively occupied, have a right of return to a school role.
I understand that.
So there's no redundancy that applies to that category of workforce.
Sure.
But your question was about those that leave entirely, that don't take up that option.
Yes.
I'll just indicate, Ms Mitchell, it's probably likely to be around March that we know what that figure would look like, because the school year would have kicked off, the placements would have all occurred.
And look, I appreciate what you say, that there's a right of return, but I've also heard anecdotally that some people are not going back to their schools. So anyway, but that's a matter for individuals, but if you can give us that data when you have it, that would be great. In terms of, I guess, the broader, and of those positions, in terms of any based in the regional offices like Coffs Harbour and Tamworth, again, they're two areas that I've heard that there's a number of those positions that are going. Is that spread across the state, or where are they based in terms of that?
So we'll be placing people regionally. What we've been doing, so we don't, have a particular type of person often in every region. What we do is say, look, we're looking for people with this particular experience, and if you're located regionally, we will employ you out of that local office.
Yeah, but those who are Nesbitts at the moment, going back to, some of them could be working in the regional departmental offices, yes, and then are going back. Is that correct?
That's right, but we will still be having regionally based staff in all of the regions.
Okay. Is there an overall reduction in the number of staff in regional departmental offices across the full department? And that's probably a better one for you, Mr. Disder.
I don't have a single figure, but I would like to give this to the committee because I think it's really important context. I just want to find it and not get it wrong for you. Here it is. In June 20, the support arm of the organisation that we call Support Office, it was better known as Corporate Office, if you like, which has a footprint right across the state. We were 5,634 staff.
So June 20 this year, or June 2020, do you mean?
June 2020.
Right, yep.
We were 5,634 staff across the entire state by way of support to schools. And by June 24 this year, 4 years later, we were 8,720.
Yep.
So
Okay.
the support arm had grown considerably while we were dropping 23,000 student enrolments, while we had something close to 2,500 teacher vacancies. So my view as secretary is that we did not have the right balance between...
Thanks, Mr. Disder. So what I'd like to know, so in June 2024, so June this year, there were 8,720 in that support arm, as you say. What is that number going to be, say, by June next year? Obviously, you've been given targets by the government to reduce the number of staff that you have. What do you work, like how many positions, and how's that changing? What's the target number that you've got?
I'd value finishing off my earlier answer.
Well, I appreciate that, but we don't have a lot of time, and we're here because we want to get more data and more information from the department. June 2024, 8,720. There's a restructure in place. What is the end target for the number of staff in that support arm, using your terminology?
I'm happy to answer that as well. So I was indicating that the support arm had grown exponentially while we had 2,500 teaching vacancies and a drop in enrolments. So there were roles that lay vacant, that were unoccupied, that were unused. There was duplication that was that had developed that needed to be addressed. There is no government target for the reduction on the support side. There is a PSSE government target across every agency that we would reduce PSSE count by 15%, and we're well on track to deliver that target. That's the only personnel target we have, and we're about halfway to meeting that target.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Disler. In terms of some of the other areas for restructure, I think I asked you last time about any reductions of positions within PES and where that was up to. Are you able to provide any updates in relation to those staffing numbers?
Yeah, I can.
Thank you.
Sorry, just bear with me because Mr. Rumming would have had it at his fingertips.
That's all right.
But I'm just finding it for you. We're increasing the number of positions in PES overall. We're appointing more investigators and embedding the final recommendations of the Tedeschi review, and that was to bring the average number of cases per investigator down. So we're actually putting in more investigators, and the way we're increasing the overall number in PES is, that investigator number is going from 19 to 24. We're reducing, we're taking out 2 director roles in that structure, and overall PES is going up in workforce.
Okay, so when you're going up in workforce, what was it previously, and how many will it be?
Let me
after that?
get you the exact number.
Okay, on notice?
Yeah.
Okay, thank
But
you.
overall, we're going up in number
Okay,
with
similar,
more investigators.
Sure, thank you. Similar questions just in relation to the early childhood division as well. And again, I appreciate Mr. Barrackett is not here, but what's the changes in staffing numbers in the early childhood?
Yeah, let me
division?
grab that for you too, Miss Mitchell.
Thank you.
Sorry, just let me get to the right spot on it. With the Early Childhood Outcomes Division, we're consolidating our structure from 6 directorates into 5 directorates. They're grouped by function and aligned to deliver priority work, including the 100 public preschool commitment, supporting the growing ECEC workforce, and supporting those communities where there's shortages of early childhood provision. In PSSE roles, we're going from 25 to 23, a reduction in 2 positions. And in non-PSSE role, we're going from 523 to 512, a reduction in 11 positions.
Thank you. And then
Some of whom are vacant.
Sure. Thank you. And then just lastly, same questions for the school infrastructure division. Any sort of consolidation and changes to roles there too, please?
Yeah, let me get you the exact number on notice for that one, if that's okay.
That would be great. Yeah.
Because that's got some movement of roles from infrastructure into people group, into the operations group, into comms and engagement.
Thank you.
That was an area of the organisation that was operating in parallel and had duplicative functions, which I've been taking back in. For example, in comms and engagement, consolidating those roles, in health and safety, consolidating those roles. So I want to get the accurate number
That would
for
be
you.
great. Thank you if you could give that to us on notice. I just want to move now to just some questions around the additional school development days that there will be in 2025.
Sure.
And I'm just wondering if you could clarify. I note that there were some comments from yourself in, I think it was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald, saying that there would be supervision at schools but on those days, but the Teachers Federation made it clear that there would not be. What is the message to parents? Should they be keeping their children at home on those additional days, or will there be supervision at schools?
Well, school development days, firstly, are really critical. It enables the entire workforce to undertake professional learning and development. Most of it is, in fact, system directed, like we've done days on Aboriginal education and days on explicit teaching. It goes to the professional development of our teaching and non-teaching staff. And ever since school development days have existed, they've always been student-free days. They're designed for the staff to undertake learning.
Again, I genuinely appreciate that, but it's a specific question.
Yeah.
There was mixed messaging in terms of those additional days, particularly at the start of the year. For a mum or dad who's watching now, do you keep your children at home or do you send them on those additional days?
Yeah, so I don't think there's any mixed messaging. Forever and a day, those school development days have been designed for teachers and non-teaching staff to undertake professional learning. They're student-free, but there's always been supervision available if parents cannot make any alternate arrangement. When Miss Summerhays was principal, when I was principal, that was the case, and it still remains to be the case. And the thing that we've also improved for parents is that there's no longer a staggered start to the school year. So you'd be aware that in high schools, for example, you'd have 7, 11 and 12 start.
Sure.
Then you'd have 8, 9 and 10 start. In primary schools, you'd have kindergarten start over a period of 2 weeks. So we've got everyone starting on the same day.
Okay, thank you. And then just in relation to the performance and development framework and the specifics of that in the most recently signed agreement, can you update the committee or advise the committee in sort of practical terms what has changed? And there's been some public commentary that effectively that the department won't be able to make any changes to that framework without union agreement. Is that correct?
We don't plan to make any changes at the moment to the performance and development.
But my point is, if you were to, you'd need to get union agreement to do that. Is that correct?
We're not considering making any changes, but if we were to consider changes down the track, we'd consult with the Teachers Federation, the PPA and the SPC, and we indicated in the award that would be a formal consultation that we'd undertake with the Federation.
Okay, and if there was, and I appreciate what you're saying that there's no current plan, but you know it's a 3-year term, a 3-year agreement, there might be a chance that you'd need to do that. If you don't reach agreement with the union on any changes, does that mean that they would not go ahead under the award that was signed recently?
I think it's hypothetical. We'd work with them productively if there was to be any change, but I reiterate, we've got no need to make change.
Again, I appreciate that. I'm trying to get to the detail of what was in the signed award.
It's a performance and development framework that's working really well.
That's Mr.
And one of the
Dizdar.
things that the workforce is keen for us to do is not to make change for the sake of change.
I appreciate what you're saying, but I'm trying to get to the specifics of there is a signed award. If there is to be any changes to performance development, do you need union agreement? Was that part of the deal that was signed?
We need to consult with the union.
Right, and if they don't agree with what you want to do, does the department have the right to come
I don't
in?
envisage we'd be in a position like that. We'd work through with them.
But I'm asking if you were, because this could happen, and there has to be details in what's been signed. If you reach a stalemate, who has I guess the power to make, do you as the employer have the power to make those changes, or do you need union agreement to do it?
I mean, with all due respect, Ms Mitchell, it's a hypothetical. I've indicated to the committee that we don't have any intent to change it. It's working well. We did agree with the Federation that if we were to contemplate changes, we'd consult with them.
Okay, so there's nothing in writing, nothing in writing that says any changes need to be agreed to by the union.
It's the award agreement indicates that we need to consult with the union.
Right, but not have agreement, just consult.
Well, we've been working very productively with all the stakeholders. If we were to contemplate a change, we'd look at working productively with them.
Okay, but I want to know specifically the wording. It's only consult, not full agreement. Is that correct?
I don't have the exact wording in front of me.
Right. Well, could you take that on notice and supply it to the committee, because it's actually important in terms of the detail.
Yeah, I'm happy to.
Thank you. That would be great. Just in the couple of minutes that we have left, do you have any updated data in terms of the number of resignations and the number of retirements since the committee last met?
Yes, I do.
Could you provide those, please?
Sure. Just give me a moment. Again, I'll just find it for you. in 2023, in the school year 2023, we had 1,078 retirements, which was 2% of the workforce. That was down from a decade ago, 2013, at 1,860 retirements, or 3.8% of the workforce. On the resignation side, just let me get you the right data. In 2023 school year, we were 2,050 resignations. I don't have the comparable figure.
So can I just pick you up on that point? So
Sure.
that data was first supplied to this committee back in 2023, and Mr. Rooming, when he was here last time, I think actually indicated that came to the committee in 2022. So there hasn't actually been any new data. We were told, and I know he's not here, but Mr. Rooming said that there would be some more data, I think, that was due to be looked at in March of 2024, but you're still giving me the data that we first got as a committee back in 2022. So why has there not been any updated data?
I'll have to go back and ask Miss Mitchell. That's the data I've got in front of me.
Okay, so and I'll come back to this, but there was an article in the Herald last week that gave new figures saying that there were 2,604 resignations and retirement in 2024 compared to 2,860 in 2023. So none of those figures match up. And I was just really keen to know what is the latest retirement and resignation data, because what you're giving us is now almost a year and a half old.
Let me go and check that. That's the data I've got in front of me that I read out to you. So let me go and double check and make sure we get you the
Thank you.
picture
We might come back
perfect
to that.
data of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr Disdar, in August at our budget estimates, the Deputy Premier acknowledged that the department's document entitled Supporting the School Community During the Current Conflict in the Middle East needed to be, quote, looked at, after I pointed out the discriminatory impact it was having in our schools. Has that document been reviewed?
We've been going and looking at all of the material advice that we've been given on the Israeli-Palestine conflict, the Middle East conflict.
In relation to that document?
All of it, all of the advice we've given.
Has that document changed?
We have issued to the workforce since October 23 11 pieces of correspondence that relates to how to best support our school communities through an evolving war, how to work with our students and communities around racism and religious intolerance, how they've got a personal right to participate in activities, but they've got to respect their professional rights, how the impact on the Israeli-Gaza conflict is widespread in our school communities. We've made available support material to them around supporting our students and communities in a time of crisis.
Do you think that all of that is working? I mean, when I pointed out the discrimination that was occurring with teachers and staff in the previous estimates, the Deputy Premier acknowledged that this needed to be looked at. Do you think that some sort of clarifying document been sent out to ensure those events don't happen?
I know that our school communities, there's 2,216 out there, have been doing an enormous job in navigating a very difficult space.
How does something like the Condell Park situation occur? I'm sure you're aware of this, where somebody's wearing a cultural item that's been worn by their family and their culture for thousands of years on official occasions and ceremonies, suddenly gets punished for wearing that, and then we end up with a student being not allowed to go to their school formal. Do you think that is a sign of this policy working?
I'd really value finishing my earlier answer, and then I'm happy to answer to Condell Park. I believe schools have been doing a huge job under very difficult circumstances right across this state. This Middle East conflict can no doubt heighten people's sense of insecurity and can evoke a range of emotions. We're talking about a war that's been occurring, and there's heightened international tensions. Schools don't create these tensions. Schools have to then respond and
But
deal.
Sorry, with respect, we know about the context in which the guidance was issued. When I asked on questions on notice in the last estimate session and also separately, I was told that that document was not a policy. It was a communique. And it was not a policy. And yet in the Sydney Morning Herald article talking about this Condell Park incident on the 22nd of November, it says, quote, a spokesperson for the New South Wales Department of Education said its rules were clear about keeping school events apolitical. Now, are they rules? Is this a rule, this communique?
I'm not going to comment on the Condell Park situation because it's the subject of proceedings in the Human Rights Commission, and I have to be respectful around the confidentiality around that. I'm happy to talk broader if you'd like.
But Mr. Disdar, as Secretary of the Department that has issued a series of documents, do you take responsibility for schools having interpreted those documents in ways that have given them cover to be discriminatory in this way?
Our schools, we have asked of them what we've always asked, that they remain apolitical.
Yeah, but you would agree, wouldn't you, that wearing a Palestinian scarf is not a political statement, it's a cultural statement for somebody from Palestine?
Chair, with due respect, if I can finish the question you asked me, then I'm happy to go to the next question. But I get half a sentence in and you're on to the next question.
If you could be relevant to the question.
Well, I think I'm being very relevant to the question. I'm addressing it directly. We've asked our schools to remain apolitical for a very tricky situation, a global conflict. They are to not adopt a side. They are to remain neutral in supporting their school communities, and we've been quite clear.
But Mr. Disdar, how does that relate to, if you agree, as anybody with, education such as yours, I would hope would agree, that when you've been wearing a cultural, a symbol of your culture that's been worn for thousands of years, that cannot possibly be a political statement, can it, Mr. Disdar?
It can be.
In what way can it possibly be a political
Then
statement?
let me answer. With the current international tensions in the Middle East, there's a heightened risk. There's a heightened risk that wearing of national colours or display of flags or conducting similar activities can be interpreted as dividing students on national culture
Mr. Disdar,
or
that is
religious.
just,
Well, you might not agree,
with
Chair.
respect, but that
You
is
might
just
not agree.
that is ignorant and racist to be suggesting that somebody's cultural item they've worn for thousands of years, just because the right-wing media have decided that it's somehow a political statement. We know, as educated people, you're in charge of the education department, you know that this is just a cultural item, don't you, Mr. Disdar?
It can unintentionally, I was trying to finish, impact on the well-being of students, staff and the community because of that heightened sense
What about
of tension.
the impact on people from Palestine who are just going about their business wearing cultural items in the same way as anybody from any other culture, and they're dealing with this now discrimination and racism because of a guidance or documents or rules and leadership that your department has been responsible for? Does that not? Are you not worried, Mr. Disdar, that these people who are now suffering from this sort of discrimination are suffering because of a document that you have issued?
I don't concur with how you characterise the advice that we've issued. We have not issued advice so that we can be discriminatory around who we serve. Far from it. We've issued advice under very tricky conditions for school communities, a global conflict that's away from us that impacts and has heightened tensions and feelings around what that can look like for community is not easy. We'd rather come to the table and just deliver teaching and learning and not contend with that conflict. I have students of a variety of backgrounds in my context, and it's incumbent on me and my staff to be neutral around that, particularly
Mr.
during
Disdar,
times of heightened sensitivity.
How on earth is it neutral to declare unilaterally that one person's cultural item is political while one other person's cultural item is not, just because, as you say, there's a war going on many, many miles away. How is it at all acceptable in Australian society in 2024 to discriminate against people because of their culture?
We haven't. I don't concur that our advice has been to.
So you're completely okay with what's happened at Condell Park?
I don't concur that our advice has had an intention to create discriminatory actions inside our school gates. Our workforce has required support from us at a very difficult time.
And it's not received it, though, has it? If this is the
difficult time.
impact, if the impact is discrimination and racism in our schools, it is not political to be wearing a cultural item. What is political is to be silencing people because there's some sort of fear that it could be viewed by some as political. Don't we have an obligation to teach our students and to educate our students about what symbols mean and what is an appropriate cultural item to wear?
We take that obligation very seriously. That's why we have a strong anti-racism stance in public education.
Well, it's
We
being
take that
breached at the
stance
moment, though,
very
isn't it, Mr.
seriously.
Dister?
No, it's not at all. I don't
We'll
concur.
see what the Human Rights Commission
That
has
is
to
your
say about
view,
it. No,
Chair.
it's...
I don't concur.
Okay, I understand you don't concur. Does the Deputy Premier, who said that she would look at this and actually seemed to have some compassion for this issue, when she said that this would be looked at, does she agree with you that this is completely... Sorry.
You can't ask questions of the Secretary about
No,
the
that's-
attitude of the
That is
Minister.
completely
Sorry,
fair.
Anthony, we can't hear you.
Sorry. My point of order is that you can't ask questions of the Secretary about an opinion of the Minister, or the
No,
position
You
of the
could ask
Minister.
if you've had discussions.
I can ask, though, have you had discussions with the Deputy Premier around this communique since the August budget estimates, when she agreed it should be looked at?
I've had very many discussions since October 23 with the Deputy Premier around this,
About this,
about this matter.
right. And you believe that you are following the policy guidance of the Deputy Premier then?
No, I've been indicating to the Deputy Premier what the department's stance is around this in best navigating what is a global crisis, a war across the globe that's impacting on our school context. You might have the view that you don't concur with
No, it's
that, but
very,
I've been
well, I can see what's happening
briefing
on the ground. It's very disappointing. I'll go to my colleague.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, good morning. Good to see you all. I just want to ask a couple of quick questions. One, I just wanted to ask in relation to the recent shutdown that the Minister for Transport and the government were potentially going to have across a Friday to a Sunday, starting, I think, the date of the 22nd of November. Ms. Distar, what I wanted to ask was, did any of the departmental transport officials, either the Minister or office or heads of the department there, contact you in relation to any impact on the schools on Friday?
Yeah, we organisationally had been in contact with Transport for New South Wales around it.
You were specifically about the impact on Friday, the 22nd of November, knowing that a lot of schools would do remote learning?
Around the potential impact
Yes.
of what that, if it took place,
Yes.
the industrial action, so that we could give any necessary communication to our people on the ground.
Did you contact principals then in that case to prepare for remote learning?
So we went back and looked at what we'd done in the past, and because it doesn't have a universal impact everywhere in the state, we were in a position where we're going to put some advice for our directors' educational leadership to those areas that were going to be more impacted. It didn't come into play. We were ready to do it if needed.
Did any schools still do remote learning though?
Not to my understanding.
Okay. Well, I'm
Not because of the industrial action that was planned.
Well, no, but they had planned. So schools had to make plans on the Wednesday. At that time, it was pretty clear from media reports that the action would continue on Friday,
Yeah.
and they had to notify parents at that on that day.
Yeah.
And I think by the time this was resolved, very late on the Thursday,
Yeah.
at about 5 p.m., it was too late for some of those principals of the schools to then of the high schools that were impacted to then contact parents, and I understand remote learning did continue for some schools on the Friday.
My understanding, but I'll go back and happy to check.
Can you take that on notice for me? Just
Yeah.
I don't need to know the names of the schools, but I'd like to
Sure.
know the number of schools that did have to make provisions such as remote learning on the Friday. I'd also like to know, Mr. Disdar, how many sporting events and other events that had to be cancelled. As I understand, exams as well were cancelled or postponed by schools on the Wednesday for that Friday. So I'd like to know the full impact of on schools in Sydney in particular.
Yeah,
but in
Miss-
New South Wales.
Miss Mahalik, my understanding at the time was that there was no material impact on our schools. I'll check if any were
I think you should check, Mr.
non-operational. I'll
Disdar,
check
because
that.
obviously I have some cognizance of some impact myself, and I know, talking to other parents, that sporting activities were postponed.
Yeah.
Once they thought there was industrial action on the Wednesday, sporting activities were postponed for Friday, and also a lot of other activities, including exams, have postponed.
Yeah, let me see what I can reasonably
Yeah, I'd like
get
to know
on
the
that.
number of schools that had an impact directly as a result of this industrial action potentially being proposed on the Wednesday and then stopped late
Let me
Thursday.
see what we've got available.
And in these sorts of instances, Mr. Disdar, do you expect that the heads of the transport contact you as well, and given the seniority of your position and the need that you have to contact schools? I mean, I think to me it looked like the government just wasn't cognizant. I asked a very clear question on the Thursday in question time, and it was obvious to me that the government, or certainly from the Department of Transport and the Minister and the Premier, did not really take into consideration the impact on schools. Everybody sort of worried about the concerts and so forth on the weekend, but they didn't really have a clear understanding of the potential impact on Friday. Is there a way that, Mr. Disdar, that you could perhaps speak with the Premier, or certainly with the Minister for Transport, to let them know that these type of industrial actions have significant impact on
Yeah,
schools?
Miss Mahalik, I'm not sure I can speak for former events, but certainly on this event we had great contact from the Transport Department, and we were right across the possibility that would occur, and in fact we were geared to give appropriate communication to our schools.
Did you give appropriate communication to schools?
We because I said to you the potential impact, and it didn't go ahead, is not uniform across the state. We were in a position where we're going to give advice for our DELs to those areas that were going to be more impacted. It didn't come into play. But I've got to commend my transport colleagues. They were communicating with us throughout, and were very cognizant that it could have impact on schools.
So, Mr. Disdar, do you know, I mean, you may not know this, mate,
Yeah.
need to take this on notice, how many kids, school students catch trains in Sydney, in the Sydney Basin?
Yeah, I wouldn't
Can
have
you take that on
I
notice?
wouldn't have that data.
I'd imagine it'd be
haven't-
well into many, many thousands,
we're
right?
close to 800,000 students, so it'll be a large number.
It'd be a large proportion of that, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So I can only imagine that if suddenly there's no trains on the Friday,
Yeah.
the vast majority of these 800,000 students possibly take some sort of public transport, if not trains.
Well, it would definitely have an impact. Definitely have an impact on school attendance and what it means for families. Some would make other arrangements to get them there, but in
Well,
my
if a school
experience, it would
tells
have an
their
impact.
students that they've got to do remote learning, presumably a parent has to take a day off to manage that at home on the Friday.
Look, I do not believe that came into play at all in any of
I'd
our
like you to take that on
contexts,
notice, Mr. Disdar.
But I'm happy to
Okay,
go
'cause
and
I-
check that. I'm happy
without
to go
going into
and check.
detail, I'm aware of some remote learning
Okay,
having taken
well,
place
let
on
me
the
check that,
22nd of
Miss
November.
Let me
Okay.
check that.
I'd like to just, I've got a few minutes left before I go into the next session. I just want to ask you about the mobile phone bans. And I note that there was a survey. So mobile phone usage was banned in New South Wales public schools, as you know, in October 2023. And I'd like to know how we're measuring this, sort of the effect of the ban. I know, and you're going to probably mention this to me, I know that there was a survey. The Department of Education did release results of a survey of 1,000 school principals, which touted the supposed success of the phone ban. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how they prepared that kind of data?
Yeah, Miss Mahalik, we do an annual principal survey
Yep.
that goes to our principals across the state, and because it's a departmental-led survey, we're able to put in the questions we'd like feedback on. Previously, we hadn't put in stuff on the mobile phone ban, so we're able to insert that question. Remember, this phone ban applied to high schools?
Yes.
That's where it came in new.
Yes, New South Wales public high schools, yes.
Yeah. So we've got about 1,000 schools that serve high school students. They are high schools and central schools and schools for specific purposes. So
Well, who
that's,
conducted the survey? This is a survey the department does, or a third party does the survey?
it's a department-led survey, yes.
Okay, but is that handed over to a third party to undertake, or
It's handed
within the
over
department?
to our Centre for Educational Statistics and Evaluation,
Right.
CC, which does all our research arm and evaluation arm.
Okay, because I'm interested, for example, with the data they've come up with, that 81% say students' learning has improved since mobile phones were banned. How do you assess something like that? Because how does the centre assess data like that?
Yeah, these are direct questions that we asked of our principals and schools, and in my movements, and Miss Summerhayes might add to this, principals are reporting less disruption in classrooms.
No, they've said specifically that students' learning has improved.
Yeah, and it goes to less disruption in classrooms. It can go to less suspensions around mobile phones and less detentions and less parental
But
contact.
that's different from improved learning, Mr. Disdale. You'd accept that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, improved learning is suggesting that there's better outcomes in NAPLAN results, for example, and literacy and numeracy results. So isn't that what improved learning would ordinarily mean?
Where you're spot on is when teachers are reporting, and that's what they are reporting.
No, this is the principal's reporting. This is only a principal survey, Mr. Disdale.
Yeah, they're reporting about what the feedback is they're getting in the school. That when there's less
So
distraction.
do they conduct a separate survey? Do the principals conduct a survey of their teachers? How do
No,
they
no,
get
this
to
is a
that?
statewide survey that I'm speaking about.
And
Oh,
that's a statewide survey only of principals, right? Only
Yeah, and-
principals
and
participate in this survey.
when principals are responding to that, Ms Mahalik, they're responding in relation to their school community and the feedback they're getting.
Well, it's a quite big statement to say that 81% say students' learning has improved since mobile phones were banned. I'm just wondering, isn't there? We've got to get a little bit more than just a survey from principals to indicate that. I would have liked to have seen, are the results different in NAPLAN across year 7 or year 9, or are there better results coming out of year 11 yearly marks? I mean, where are these sorts of, where's the improved learning
think it's-
outcomes?
Yeah, I think
being,
it's...
and how's it being assessed, Mr. Disdale? It
think
can't
it-
just be a survey of principals who are saying, yep, it's all great.
I think it's outstanding feedback.
It's
Secondary
out-
principals can be some of
feedback
our
that
harshest
it's hard to
critics.
measure what this feedback really means. I mean, I would have liked to have heard more from teachers specifically in terms of mobile phone bans. Also, Mr. Disdale, can I ask you?
Can I also give you another data point you might be interested
Yes.
in?
If there's more data, I'd be
happy to have. You could take it. You can
This
you
is-
could take it on
this
notice.
is
Any
from-
data you have about the mobile
No,
phone
I've got one
bans,
in
I'd
front of
like
me
to-
that I
yes.
can give to you. This is from the Department of Customer Service, so it's not from our department. And they ran a customer sentiment survey from 24 April to 1 May, and it said that 72%...
24th of April to the 1st of May.
Yeah.
What year are we talking?
23, that 72% of parents were positive about
Hang on.
the
So
idea.
in 24th of April 23 to
Mm.
the 1st of May 23, they conducted a survey before this ban came into play.
Yes.
The
To-
ban came into play in October 23rd.
I was
how-
going to give you one before and then one after.
Oh, okay, so the parents were saying that they were upset in customers at that point.
No,
or
no.
the- But this is
Can I
improved
take a
learning
point
outcomes.
of order, I think.
I think we'll go to
Yeah,
Yes.
if we can just allow Mr. Disdale
Sure,
to
sure. He
complete
can
his
answer it, I'll come
answer,
back
and then
later.
I think
Okay,
it
I
would-
uphold the point of order.
Yeah. So before the survey, 72% of, before the ban, sorry, 72% of parents were positive in New South Wales about the idea of the introduction of the ban
Yes.
for public high school
I
students.
support it myself. Yes.
And then the customer, this is the Department of Customer Service, again, 25 March 24, 72% responded that they were positive about the impact of the ban on their students, on their children.
Back to the opposition.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. Mr. Giselle, I just want to go back to just some more sort of staffing numbers. Just before our time finished, before I was mentioning an article in the Sydney Morning Herald that was published on the 19th of November this year that said there were 2,604 resignations and retirements in 2024 compared to 2,860 in 2023. And I appreciate you said you wanted to take that on notice, but could you just take on notice for me, firstly, whether that data that was provided to the Sydney Morning Herald was correct, and secondly, the breakdown of those numbers of how many were resignations and how many were retirements, please.
Sure.
Thank you. Also, last time we got some data from Mr. Rooming just about the overall numbers of permanent, temporary and casual teachers employed by the Department of Education. Are there any updated figures that you can provide for us with that breakdown? And again, happy for you to take it on notice, but...
Let me get the breakdown for you.
Oh, sorry, you can take it on note. Sorry,
sorry,
when you
let-
said you'd get the data for me,
Yeah,
I
no,
thought you
no.
were looking at you.
It's not
Thank
at
you.
my fingertip. Let me
That's
get it
okay.
for
If you could provide it on notice, there was a table that we got last
Okay.
time, so if we could get an update
We'll
of
update the
that.
table.
Thank you. And then also just the latest vacancy data that you have for public schools. I know that the Minister recently has been using figures from the start of term 3, but you'd appreciate that's now a few months old. Do you have any of the latest vacancy data for us, just across the system, of what the current vacancy numbers are?
Let me have a look at what I've got that I might be able to give to you. I've got term 3 week 2, so
So you have,
I'm
but we're term 4 week 7 or 8 now. You don't have any updated data.
I'm just having a look for you, Miss Mitchell. No, that's what I've got in front of me, so let's go back and take it on
If
notice.
you could
and
take
give
it on
notice.
notice, if you can get us that even before the end of the hearing today, if possible, because I know that it's only a statewide number. It shouldn't be too difficult to get for us.
We'll
That
see
would
if
be
we can
great.
do that. We'll
Thank
see if
you.
we can do that.
Appreciate that. The policy change for the conversion of temporary to permanent roles for both teachers and SLSOs. Are you able to tell us, and we've had the overall figures in terms of the number of people that have taken up those opportunities, but can you provide any data in terms of how many of those teachers and SLSOs have either had a reduction in hours, have changed schools or have left the department since that policy was implemented?
So firstly, there wouldn't be any reduction in hours.
So no SLSOs have lost days or any hours?
No, in fact, when we offered to increase hours. So there can only be a reduction in hours for an individual if they requested it.
Okay.
That's the first thing. The second part of your question?
How many have changed schools, so were made temporary permanent after being at a particular school, but their position is no longer at that school and they've had to move somewhere else?
So this temp to perm was to appoint them at their current site,
Right.
and so they're all appointed to their current site because they'd done 3 or more years of temp in their current site. The only way they could then move from their current site is through promotion or resignation or nominated transfer process.
So every single one of those, and I'll just stick with teachers, who were made permanent under this policy, continue to be at the school that they were at unless they have asked to move. So their positions are all there for them at that school. No one's been moved anywhere else.
No.
Not one teacher.
No. They were appointed to that school.
Yes.
And the only way they can move is through promotion elsewhere, through retirement, or through nominated transfer from the system, which is being worked through and is always worked through in term 4 and in term 1.
Yes.
So I could give you that figure at the end of term 1.
Okay, so just in really simple terms,
Yeah.
say if I'm a teacher at Neutral Bay Public School,
Sure.
I've been a temporary there for at least 3 years, I've been given a permanent role there, I don't want to leave, I'm happy at that school, I'm still able to stay at that school. I'm not being moved, I'm not being told I've got to go and teach anywhere else.
You're appointed there, and what happens is if you don't want to move, so you're not chasing a promotion, you're not retiring, you're not resigning, you stay there, but you're part of the school's normal staffing processes, which include nominated transfer. So if at Neutral Bay, the example you gave, we dropped student numbers,
Yes.
and we needed one less teacher
Yes.
in this scenario, the principal would work with the staff to see who would want to nominate and get a move.
Yes.
If there wasn't anyone, they'd work on the school needs and then someone would move.
Okay, so thanks. So you've just
That could be that person.
Yeah. And
It may not be that person.
I just picked Neutral Bay as a random
Yeah.
one, just to be clear. I haven't
Great
spoken to anyone
school,
at Neutral
though.
Bay.
Great
It is a
school.
great school. So there theoretically there are people under this position who got their permanent role at a certain school but may find themselves being transferred somewhere else if their staffing numbers at that school have gone down.
They could.
Right. And do you have any data that you can provide on notice and it might be next year, and I appreciate what you're saying about terms 4 and 1 and the changes, but how many have actually been made permanent but are being transferred to another school, or have then chosen to leave the department altogether because they haven't been able to stay at their preferred school?
Yeah, we can look at that. It's a difficult piece, but we can look at it.
Yeah, just because, again,
Yeah.
I've had reports coming from colleagues and from others about great idea in theory, but a lot of people are finding that the roles at those schools aren't there anymore because of staffing changes, and so that people are either leaving, going to non-government schools, because while they've been made temporary, there actually isn't a position for them at the school where they want to be teaching at. And that's just come back as concern.
Yeah, so let me go and look at that, but it wouldn't be until the end of term 1 when it's all done, that staffing process. Also, maybe this would help, this little piece of information too. It's not a last in, first out process.
Yes, no, I appreciate that. Yeah.
So when that neutral bay example comes up,
Yes.
with one less teacher, you work with your whole staff on who that nominated transfer
And
might
does
be.
the same apply for SLSOs as well, in terms of positions have been made permanent, but if the budget structures don't allow for the number of SLSOs to be at a particular school, then they may also be placed elsewhere or be
Roughly
looking for
the
other
same
roles.
procedures. They're not
Right.
picture exact with the teaching,
Yes.
but roughly the same. Yeah.
So when you talk about an overall figure of people who've been made permanent, whether they are teachers or SLSOs, there is actually a proportion of those people who are either going to be at other schools at some point or potentially leaving just because of the nature of the staffing system.
So close to 17,000, 16,500
Yes.
were made permanent, both
Yes.
teachers and SLSOs. They maintained permanency in the system. And nominated transfers are a natural part of staffing operations.
Yes.
As numbers of students go up and down, they've always been there. And these people are now permanent and can be part of that process.
Yeah, so that 17,000 over time will
I
likely
rounded
go
off
down.
that figure too.
Yeah, but will likely go down as people move or maybe get given a job at a school that they don't want to go to.
they're still
or-
permanent.
Yes, but it could not be it may not be for a long-standing position. Anyway, that's
Once
fine.
you're
I'm just gonna-
permanent, you can't lose your permanency.
Yes, but you can be told to go elsewhere, and that's a choice that you then make as well, if you
Well-
want to take that role or not.
So some go of their own accord, like I
Yeah.
said, and the others, if unfortunately the school comes into
I
play where there's
understand.
drop-in numbers,
Yeah.
it's a nominated process.
Sure.
Yes.
I'll just hand over to my colleague to do a few questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dister, can people hear me? I can't hear myself.
Yeah, we can
Okay,
hear you.
Sorry, thank you.
Yes,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Moon.
Yeah. If I could just start, Mr. Dister, and this probably fits with you. If I could touch on the code of conduct, and I know that Madam Chair's spoken about this earlier today, but Mr. Dister, could I just ask, does the code of conduct remain in place today, relevant to New South Wales schools and teachers?
It does.
And if I make reference to correspondence I've had from the Deputy Premier relating to the application of this, Mr. Dister, does the controversial issues in schools' procedures form part of that code of conduct?
Correct.
Mr. Dister, we've spoken previously about Davidson High School and the reports and the concerns there relevant to students of the Jewish faith. The correspondence from the Deputy Premier in reference to that cites that the materials screened in the classroom that were described, reported as anti-Jewish, anti-Western propaganda by a self-described socialist YouTube account, and the Deputy Premier refers to that as ill-advised. Mr. Dister, how is this not a breach of the teacher's code of conduct?
So first I want to commend 95,000 teachers out there who do a sterling job in delivering the syllabus every single day. And as a former teacher in the system, you're making your professional judgment around what resources and material you use to bring that syllabus and curriculum to life. And it can be tricky because when you're going to address what can be deemed a controversial issue, you've got to have balanced perspective around that. And I'd like to think I got it right every time as a teacher, but occasionally you may not get that right. It is appropriate that referrals are made, and in this case I can tell you, Miss Merton, the appropriate referrals and actions took place. You know, you could be talking about a teacher who's had an exemplary teaching career and record, and the judgment on this occasion, in hindsight, was not optimal and led to controversy, and you may end up through appropriate counselling and reminding them of their duties that may be sufficient. In other cases, you might have an
Thank you,
employer
Mr. Disar, and
that's
I
got
think
it wrong
you've
on numerous
you've ca-
occasions, and you
you've-
might need to take
You've
other
captured
action.
that in terms of ill-advised, not thought through, the screening,
Yeah.
and I think Davidson High School is an example of that in terms of being ill-advised. So, Mr. Disar, my question is, how is this not a breach to the code of conduct?
Well,
This example.
Respecting the privacy of the individual, I just want to assure you,
I'm not
Ms.
asking
Merton,
for private details.
I want to assure you, Miss Merton, that the appropriate referrals were made and appropriate action was taken with that employee.
So parent reports, the school community report, I think the school reported that the individual teacher in this instance continues to teach within that school.
Like I said, the appropriate referral was made, that matter was assessed, and the appropriate required disciplinary action was taken with that staff member, commensurate and in line with their track record of service in public schools.
So, Mr. Disdale, could you just run me through the process for reporting breaches of the code of conduct?
Sure.
How does it work? A concerned parent, an example like this, you know, a family of the Jewish faith, this individual student, very distressed, a long absence from school, doesn't want to return to the classroom.
Sure. So
how does the code of conduct work when an instance like this, and our highest respect for the teaching profession, this ill-advised screening of this material?
So I encourage parents to make that report to the school principal, and the school principal then refers that to the professional and ethical standards for independent assessment and examination.
Mm-hmm. Do we not recognise that often a parent reporting directly to the school of their child can cause, discomfort? It's not appropriate.
I'd like every parent, including myself as a parent in the system, to feel comfortable enough to report it to the school. But if they're
But
not,
what avenues are available to a parent in a situation where I'm not comfortable reporting this breach in my child's school directly to the principal? What else is available in terms of the code of conduct and parents?
Yeah, I respect that. I find it comes into play very seldom, but if needed, they can refer it to the Director of Educational Leadership, which oversights the school. I mean, they might refer it to the Deputy Secretary.
So
and
how
Deb
would
Summaries.
parents know that this is available?
That's part of our complaints procedures.
Yeah, and where do parents find
They
that
publicly
information?
sit on our website facing this entire New South Wales community.
So there is an avenue there for parents to report?
Definitely, yes. I find it seldom comes into play. I find that parents often report to the school, which is a great way because you can get all sorts of things reported and sorted out at the school level, and it doesn't require
Can
further
you not
intervention.
recognise instances
When it
where
requires further
your
intervention,
local
it's
school
made clear.
community, you don't, you're not comfortable reporting to the local school as a concerned parent?
I want parents to
You
feel
don't recognise circumstances that could be in place?
Can I just take a point of order
Oh,
at this
yeah,
stage?
point of order.
Ms Merton is asking questions and then starting another question before
Sorry, thank you.
Distar
Yep,
is able
provide
to
time.
actually
Thanks,
start
Mr.
an
Distar.
answer to the first question. So
I uphold the
she
point
could
of
keep
order.
her questions to one at a time and allow the witness
you.
to answer the questions as they're asked.
Upheld.
There's 1.6 million parents and carers and guardians who entrust us with their children in public education. Largely, I find that they're comfortable approaching the school, but if they're not, because there can be circumstance, I appreciate that, Miss Merton, it's very clear on our complaints procedures publicly facing on our website on who they can report that to.
Would that be, could that information be made available to the committee as to how parents navigate this, what
Yeah.
the communication is available to them,
We're happy
how
to
they
send
know
you-
where to go?
We're happy to send you the link. It's on our website.
Thank you. Mr Dister, in terms of breaches of the code or whatever terminology may be on this, how many breaches have been reported in the last 12 months?
Yeah, I think the terminology alleged breaches is more factual and appropriate.
Sure. Yeah, let's use
because
that.
we have to respect that the individual has a right of response to that. Sorry, how many? Say that again. How
Alleged breaches have
Of?
been reported in the last 12 months,
many?
relevant to the code of conduct.
I'd have to take that on notice. I'm not sure if we have the totality of that data. Yeah.
Could you share with the committee a recent or where there has been a reported alleged breach of the code?
I'm happy to take it on notice. We're a very large system, 95,000 teachers, 800,000 students, 1.6 million parents. So there can be things
So just
that
to
are
let
referred-
parents know,
Yeah.
in the instance of an alleged breach being reported, and we've gone down the department reporting line on this, which you acknowledge is available,
Yes.
what is the process around it?
So there's an allegation that's put forward, and then PES receives that allegation and goes about their independent work of the school, and will interview, in my experience, interview relevant people if there's needed, including the family that made the referral, interview the teacher in the scenario you gave, and the school principal, and any other parties that might come out of that interview process that they need to speak to. And then once they've got all the material information around them, they assess that information.
Yeah.
And then
Sorry,
make a
I just missed the acronym as to who drives this. The PES,
the Professional Ethical Standards Directorate.
directorate.
Yes.
So who is who's responsible for that? Is there one individual or?
We've got an executive director that oversights that division, and a deputy secretary that oversights that area.
So they are pretty much overseeing and managing the code of conduct.
All of us are managing and enacting the code of conduct. It's incumbent on the entire workforce. But if there's allegations of potential breaches, we work with PES around that.
And in terms of the number or examples of alleged breaches in the last 12 months, that's not available
I
to
don't
us.
have that here, but I'm happy to take it on notice for you.
Okay, thank you. Is there a registrar or a table or records kept within the department or from PES as to reported breaches?
We make all of our required reporting, including to the Ombudsman and the Independent Commission Against Corruption. I sign off on all of those reports. So let me go back and get the data that you're after to see what we've got.
Yeah, thank you. Mr Disder, if I could just take you to the recent incident at Illawong Public School.
Sure.
Involving, alleged reports of inappropriate sex education content.
Sure.
Mr Disder, how were the parents of affected students informed about the incident and were they consulted during the investigation?
You have to be careful with what I cover here, Miss Merton, because as part of an investigation, we've communicated to the school community that the principal has been directed to undertake other duties in the department outside of any school whilst there's a thorough investigation into the matter. My understanding is that parents in Stage 3, Year 6 in particular, had given permission, were asked to give permission for their children to undertake sex education by an outside provider in line with the syllabus. I think that occurred to good effect. There was a follow-up of that, which has been a cause for concern and reported concern that's being investigated, and we've been communicating with the Year 6 parents. I can tell you, Miss Merton, each of them have received, at least on one occasion, an individual phone call from the relieving principal to talk to them about the matter and to talk to them about the support that's available to their child. Thank you.
Just before we start, I'm going to take a point of order. In the previous session, I'm not entirely clear about the phrase that was used, but there was an apparent imputation that the Secretary was ignorant and racist, and I'm sure that wasn't the intention of Ms Boyd. So I might just give you the opportunity to withdraw or clarify that you weren't actually suggesting that the Secretary himself is ignorant or racist.
Thank you, Mr. Adam, for that. Yes, I certainly was not suggesting that the Secretary was ignorant or racist, and I will leave it there. So, turning to something different, early childhood education and care, the regulatory authority for the ECEC sector, how many staff sit in that department?
Just bear with me, Chair, and I'll give you the exact number. I know I've got it in front of me, but I want to go to the right spot. Sorry.
You okay?
Yeah.
Close to 450
Okay.
full-time staff.
So 450 full-time staff. Do you
Close
have
to.
any details as to sort of, how are they geographically broken down? Have they got different offices in different places, or are they all centrally located?
I'd have to take that part on notice, where they're located.
Thank you. And if you could tell me how many of them are actively going out and doing site visits and how many are sort of back office functions, or any other details you can give me around that would be very useful.
Sure.
Thank
Sure.
you. It's been reported that the Australian Skills Quality Authority, the ASQA, has closed 3 colleges recently and intends to cancel 17,000 qualifications issued by those institutions, including qualifications in early childhood education. I understand, so those colleges are Luvium, Gills College, and the International Institute of Education and Training. Do you know how many early childhood workers in New South Wales will be impacted by that cancellation of qualifications?
Yes. Luvium is the one that we've been working with our federal counterparts. It cuts across other states as well. We've been working with the Office of Children's Guardian. We've been working and communicating with the sector here in New South Wales. We've been at that one for a couple of weeks now, Miss Boyd. And I am pleased to report that at this stage, it has not impacted on the viability or operations of any of the services in New South Wales.
Okay.
Because it was quite an alarming initial position that we've had to work through. And we're only in the early stages of doing the same work with the next 2 providers that the Commonwealth has put on notice.
Okay. Has there been any thought given to providing some sort of training for those students who have had their qualifications cancelled in order to get them back into the workforce?
It's certainly been a consideration in the discussions we've had around Luvium. We've had to be very careful and work on an individual basis because of possible claims of, in layman's terms, cash for credentials. So, if someone has knowingly partaken in that, it might be questionable whether we should then be giving them support to get a credential because of how they've gone about attaining it in the first place.
Yeah.
So,
But for genuine students?
Yeah, for genuine students, I certainly think there's a case of how we might support them. So the only way to get to each individual has been to check on working with children check,
Yep.
then, liaise with the sector, communicate with the sector,
Yeah.
encourage contact so we can support. And what I can tell you today is coming in, I know that there's been no service that has been materially impacted by way of not being able to operate.
Thank you.
numbers became quite small of who we were trying to pin down and liaise with at an individual level. There was a first number bandied about because Luvium was across qualifications
Yes.
and across different states
Yep.
of about 7,000 or thereabouts, Miss Boyd, but the numbers were much, much smaller when it came to early childhood in New South Wales.
Did you find a concentration in any particular service of
Not that I'm
students
aware of.
with these qualifications? No.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Could I perhaps ask for that on notice, just if there's any details around numbers of students who were working within ECEC services? I don't need the details of the service, but if it's possible to tell me if there were
I'm more
what the
than happy
numbers
to.
are and if they sort of clustered in a particular service.
I'm more than happy to. I just want to put just a disclaimer that on the grounds that I'm allowed to for the Commonwealth, etc., I just want
Yes.
to check that and not breach anything there. But
Understood.
if I can, definitely.
Thank you. I asked some questions on notice in relation to the numbers of show cause notices and other notices that were issued to ECEC services in New South Wales. It appeared that there was a disproportionately large number of show cause notices and cancellations of for-profit ECEC providers as opposed to not-for-profit ECEC providers. Is that, do you know if the regulatory authority has been doing anything additional to ensure that those profit-driven centres are not cutting corners and putting children at risk?
Yeah. I want to commend the regulatory authority for the way they enact their role. It's been quite an eye-opener for me in the 20 months as secretary. I've actually gone and done 3 field visits with the regulatory authority myself, so I can get a strong hold on what takes place in a visit and have a firm understanding of how they embed and enact the national Commonwealth standards. Their visitation rates are almost like beyond 90% of the entire sector in a year. So they're always in a continuous improvement operation as well. But I'd have to go back and see specifically if the data we've given you has led to any difference in action.
Yeah, that would be useful. I
Yeah.
think there's a number of very concerning reports that are coming out recently about children being harmed and neglected and abused in New South Wales early childhood and education services. And I guess what we are particularly concerned about is whether there's any risk analysis being applied to those for-profit centres where corners are more likely to be cut. Is that something that the regulatory authority has been looking at?
And also, so let me see if there's any specific action that's been any different. But I know you know this, Chair, that we're also enacting the review of child safety arrangements that came out of Operation Tenterfield, which has been a subject of education ministers' meetings, and we're working with every jurisdiction in the country around that.
Yeah, I think it's been reported as being a little similar to the risks that are inherent in the aged care sector as well, that when you have big profit takers coming into the market, that there is more risk to our most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
So I'm just interested if there's been some sort of risk matrix or some analysis done by the regulatory authority that is particularly looking at those private operators.
Let me find that detail out. The really comforting part, in my view, around show cause is exactly that. That means the risk rating of that site for us has now increased. It means our line of sight to that site is stronger, and it means you've got to demonstrate the improvement to address the show cause. So that's the part that I take a lot of heart out of, the fact that we saturate what the visitation looks like, well over 90%. But I think it's a good specific question. If the data has shown that there's high rates of show cause in one particular service provision arm of the sector, then let me go back and see if there's been any discernible difference in action we take.
And in terms of the regulatory authority, obviously they are subject to that national framework.
Correct.
At what point I guess at what point does the department get involved? At what point do you get involved in terms of ensuring that the regulatory authority is doing its job properly?
Well, Secretary, I've got ultimate oversight of that, and I work with my Deputy Secretary colleague. The regulatory arm sits in our operations area.
Mm-hmm.
So we, Miss Boyd, we have a early childhood division,
Mm-hmm.
but when I came in, I removed the regulatory authority from there
Yep.
and put it into the operations arm of the organisation. I wanted an arm's length
Okay.
from the actual early childhood sector,
Mm-hmm.
because now I want it strongly to be the regulator. It needs to be at arm's length without any perception, which can come into play when you sit in the same division. So we've
okay.
made that adjustment. And remember, they're regulating close to 6,000 services here in this state, with the full diversity and spread of for-profit, not-for-profit, community, preschool, etc., etc. So I know that they, like all their counterparts, are at the table to enact the national review recommendations that are coming out of Tenterfield. And I know as Secretary with our Education Minister, we've been part of those discussions at EMM.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Dister. I'm just going to go back to the mobile phone ban.
Sure.
And just in relation to, I think we're saying 1,000 high schools or 1,000 school principals that have been surveyed.
Yeah.
Can I just, so according to the digital devices in New South Wales policy and procedures, high school students are now required to leave their phones either in lockable pouches, off and away in bags, in lockers, or handed into school stuff at the beginning of the day and stored in either the classroom or the front office. How have you got a bit of a breakdown on how many schools are taking which option? How many, for example, how many schools have a mobile phone locker or pouch?
Yeah, so Asheville Boys was the fantastic example.
That's the only example I can see at the moment that have that. Are there other schools that have the mobile phone
lockers? I think
pouch?
there's
because that obviously that was something you put into the media. We saw that article. It's in May, I think May of 2024.
Yeah.
But how many other schools have that?
I think there's a number out there. There's also the Yonder pouches that they use, which are lockable pouches. Then there's
But let's be realistic, Mr. Dister. How many schools actually have these type of lockers? This was who paid for that for Asheville Boys? Is that something the department paid, or do they do it, or the P&C?
I think it would have been school funded. Dwayne Hopwood's an outstanding principal, and he
No, I'm not questioning that. But who paid for that? Was it the P&C contributed to that?
It was either the school or P&C. It wasn't departmentally installed.
Okay, but if it's one of your policies that you're suggesting that schools take up this mobile phone locker, wouldn't presumably the minister and the department want to pay for that as well? I mean, why should parents be paying for it?
Yeah. What we did, Ms Mihalik, when we consulted with the Secondary Principals Council and our principals, we said they were the options that you need to undertake. We don't want to dictate one option. We want you to find the option that works best for your school community. And if you need our assistance,
Right.
for example, this is the option you
If they
choose.
could get financial assistance from you, and that
We said
was
if
that one
you
of the
want
options?
this option,
Yes.
but you don't have the means to do that option, you can work with us.
Okay, so how many schools have taken up the option of
We had-
asking the department for funding for these particular mobile phone
We had very
lockers?
little, if any, because they do what works for them on their site and make it work on their site. Yeah.
So what are the vast majority of high schools? What option are they taking up? with
So like
mobile
I
phones?
said, we don't centrally keep the data, but there's a whole range of options when I've moved about, and Ms Summerhays might want to add to it.
So sorry, a ban was announced and there's no central data keeping up to date on how the ban's progressing.
No, I was talking about how they enact the ban, whether it's lockers or Yonder pouches or put in the office. We haven't been collecting that data.
Why not? Wouldn't you want to see that there's consistency between one school to another?
The data that we've been really interested in, and we should be really
It's
fixated
just the
on,
principal surveys.
is the impact of it. The impact of putting into place a mobile phone ban. It's had overwhelming and resounding positive feedback
Yes, but I'm
from
sure
parents and from schools.
I'm sure parents
Yeah.
and teachers and schools want to know what the end result is. You know, how consistently it's being applied across schools, particularly if you've got school children at different schools and there are different policies in place. Presumably having a mobile phone locker is far better than telling the child just to keep it in their bag. How many schools give the option of just storing it away in their bags?
Not necessarily.
Because that's one of your policies. One of the options is just to store it away in a bag.
Not
How does that go
necess-
for a Year 9 kid?
Not necessarily, because the worst thing you could do in a situation like this is to dictate one solution and think that one solution will work everywhere.
Okay.
And that's not what we've done. We've said, here's
But you're banning phones. You are dictating already by banning a phone. I mean, that's a pretty big...
We don't hide behind
statement.
that. It's been a really
yeah.
well-received move out there in schools, but what we didn't dictate is
Eventually,
the
Mr.
solution
Distar, parents are
you
going to wake up to the fact in New South Wales that it's pretty inconsistent between one school to another. I'm delighted for Ashfield boys that they've got mobile phone lockers that I understand are kept in the roll call rooms, so you can actually see them, and that's the difference between a normal locker and a mobile phone locker, is you can see your mobile, and the kids, I understand, feel some comfort, understandably so. They can see their phone, they've dropped it off there in the morning. But how many have to hand it in to the office staff, for example, at the front office, and it's not kept in a locker? That would cause a lot of anxiety, wouldn't it?
Yeah. There's been no inconsistency in the feedback we've had. The feedback is resoundingly positive.
But the feedback is only from the principals who have decided the policy for their particular individual school, right? I mean, who decides ultimately? The principal for each school.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Not the PNC.
No, not the principal. The principal does that in conjunction with the students and the parents at
So
that
you're
school.
saying the principal has a discussion with 1,000 students, and the parents multiply that by and they work out what the best policy is for their school. Are you sure the parents have been involved with each school?
In some cases they might, but that's a bit impractical. I think what they do
But
is...
don't you want to keep that data? I mean, I don't understand why the department, given you've issued such a significant ban, want to make sure that it's effective beyond a principal's survey. You need to know that parents, that there's a consistent approach across schools, and that parents are comfortable and that students are comfortable.
Let me just finish the former question
Sure.
you had, and that was how they might consult. By far and largely what occurs is they consult with the student leadership team that every school has, as well as the P&C, because I acknowledge
Okay, so it's not students now, students' leadership team. Okay, that's good.
it's drawn as students. I think it can be impractical if you're going to try and consult with 1,000 students. So that's how they make the best decisions. And the data that I'm keen on is to see if it's working, if principals and staff and community believe it's working. And that's why I'm looking at the Department of Customer Service data as well as our
But
principal
customer
service
service data is you've actually got to see the results. It's again what I asked you earlier about the learning. The supposedly improved learning outcomes, but you actually there has to be a tangible result there that you can link to this ban.
Yeah, and I know you'll concur with me that learning outcomes are based on so many things that go into a child. If I was to link mobile phone ban
But you've put it in your
to
survey, so
learning
you're
outcome,
saying that it is linked to the mobile phone.
to learning outcome, that would be a massive simplification. What
But
we're
you put
here,
it in the survey,
what we're
so you're
getting,
prepared to say it in the survey that there's been an 81% improved learning outcome as a result of this mobile
because
phone
people
ban.
are reporting that there's less distraction in classrooms, that the teacher can get
But
on
would
with
that be
teaching and
dependent
learning.
on the policy that's taken up? If kids can see their mobile phone is safely kept away in an open window sort of locker, they can then see their phone, and that reduces their anxiety. What about for those who have to hand it into at the office or?
My daughter
that
is at a fantastic government school where the policy is it's in your bag and away. And she's very happy in that school
How many
community.
incidences?
And I commend that school community.
Yep.
They wrote to us as parents and said, this is what we're thinking of adopting. Please let us know if you have any alternate views. And I certainly wrote back and said, that's
Well, I'm not
great.
sure that happened at every school. Mr. Distar, are you suggesting that every school the parents were written to, or just the one that your daughter was
Every
at?
school would have consulted with their students and their parents in a variety of ways.
Okay. How?
Well, in some cases, like Dwayne Hopwood, it was very thorough right across the school. In others, it would have been the leadership team and the P&C. At the end of the day, we made a decision around banning mobile phones in high schools, and everywhere had to adopt that. There's no
I
inconsistency
think everyone's
in
accepted that,
adopting.
Mr. Distar, but what I think is an issue, and will be an issue in the future too, is the consistency in how that's being applied. if you could only tell me that Asheville Boys is the only school at this stage that has the window
I'm happy to
locker,
get- I'm happy to
mobile
get you
phone, which
other
is probably the
examples.
best option where kids can see their phone. It's in their roll call room, and that reduces their anxiety and worry about what's happened to their phone throughout the day. Or the likelihood that they will use their phone, particularly if it's kept in a bag. Let's be honest, they're likely to probably get to it at recess or lunch, aren't they? I mean, do you keep the track of the instances of breaches of the policy?
Schools do that as part of their welfare and discipline policy.
Who does that? The principals. They keep track of that.
The school leadership team would take care of that. We're getting feedback that there's less follow-up required around mobile phones because of the ban. Less
Okay.
suspensions, less detentions, less parental contact. And I give credit to the students of the state who've also responded
Prior
to the ban.
to this ban, Mr. Disdale, wasn't there already generally a policy that that schools keep their phones away and not?
No, that wasn't the case. It
Or
was
it
banned in
school by
primary
school?
schools. It was banned in primary schools,
Yeah.
and it was left to school by school in high
But there
schools.
were some schools that were quite good about that. They
There
essentially
was,
told their
there
kids
was.
to keep their phones away.
There
and
was.
Yes.
But that's where there was inconsistency, because it was
Right.
left to high school per high school, whereas this policy said it's banned in all high schools.
But there would be it's a big difference between a phone being kept in a locker to just telling the year 9 or year 10 boy or son or student to keep it in your bag. I mean, isn't there a likelihood that they'll get to the phone that way or not?
I don't think so. I mean, the premise is there's a ban. And, you know, I find once you communicate what the rules are, most students fall in line. And we gave a range of options for schools to adopt. Like I said, my daughter is in year 10 at a fantastic government high school. Their policy is in your bag and away. And when I speak to the school principal, they've had very little follow-up required.
We've got 2.5 minutes.
I'll take my 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Mr. Disdar, there was a pre-election commitment to establish the Screen Use and Addiction Research Fund. I did ask Ms. Reid about that in previous hearings, and again, I appreciate she's not here. $2.5 million. Can you tell me how much has been allocated out of that fund and how many successful applicants there have been so far?
Do you mind, Ms Mitchell, if I take that on notice? Because I think
Okay.
we've finished the process and are about to or have communicated, so I want to take it on notice.
Okay, but I appreciate taking it on notice, but so there has been a process, people have been able to apply and it's going to be announced shortly, or it's just been a couple of years, so wondering where it's at.
We may have already informed the providers that have been successful in their application, so I don't want to get it wrong, and I don't actually have the details in front of me.
Okay, if you could
Yeah,
provide that on notice, that would be great.
that'd be good.
And then just a quick one, I've only got a minute and a half, but just in relation to the department's annual report, there was some media commentary that new targets are being finalised and they'll be available next year, but separate to the annual report. Can you just outline what those school targets will be and where parents will be able to find them if they won't be in the department's annual report anymore?
What the system targets will be,
Yes,
or the school
the
targets?
system targets.
Yeah. So that annual report was a financial year annual report for the first time. That's why they're not appearing there. And we're completing the school targets by the end of term 1. It's off the back of a break-in NAP plan with every state in the same position, and we've now got 2 years worth of
Sure,
NAP plan.
but there were so will it only be NAPLAN targets, or are there going to be attendance targets, the post HSC? All of that has been available in reports for
And
a number
all of it will be
years.
available again.
But why was that not available this time in the most recent iteration?
Because
of
they
the
don't
report?
exist.
So sorry, HSC post-school destination data doesn't exist anymore.
No,
or
because
attendance
what we're
data?
doing is going school by school and building school by school targets off the back of a United Nations report that looked into how we went about targets before. So
And
we've
but
been,
principals are setting their own and working out what measures they use. That's correct, isn't it?
No.
Well, that's been reported that some might use NAPLAN, some might use other assessments. So are you setting statewide departmental targets for every school?
We're setting statewide school targets first, which will be completed by the end of term 1, and off the back of that we'll be finalising our statewide system targets.
So when will they be publicly available?
Time is
They'll be
expired.
available in the next annual report.
I'll just do my 1 minute and 15 seconds. Can I just wanted to come back on the early childhood questions and the moving of the regulator out of childcare into the general operations. Was that done because there was a concern about regulatory capture? Was there something that sparked that move?
No, I had no concern, but because I was realigning what divisions were looking like, I felt it was a good juncture to move it.
Is that the case in other states and territories, do you know? Have they got a separate...
I'm not sure. They sit within the organisation and they sit within various divisions.
Yeah.
I felt like always like an arm's length operation and not in the division, but I didn't have any material concern in front of me.
No, and no sort of reviews or documents
No.
or any advice that
No.
led to that?
So I just lifted the whole unit and shifted where it was.
Okay. Just before I pass to my colleague, you mentioned before 11 pieces of correspondence in relation to the Middle East conflict and
Yeah.
schools. Could you provide those on notice? Just what the 11 are?
That's what we've issued to our schools since October 23.
Yeah. Are you able to provide, table the copies or provide copies?
Of each of the correspondence? Yeah,
Thank you.
they exist out there. Yeah.
Over to you. Ms.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just quickly, just back on the locker issue. So you gave a commitment here earlier that if a school, well, you certainly stated it, if a school needs that support from the department, that they can reach out to the department in relation to these type of mobile phone lockers, because I'd love to advertise that. I think schools should seek your assistance and the Minister and the Department's assistance financially. Is that, can I just
What we
remind you of the
advertised-
comment you made?
Yeah.
And can I also ask you, Mr. Dister, what is the cost? Do you know what the cost of these lockers are? You're taking a notice.
Yeah, I'm very happy with your support, but what we did advertise when we went with the one position across the state is we said to our principals, here's the range of options. If you make a particular choice around an option that works for your school community and you find that you cannot implement it, then please reach out and we'll support you. We have had
Okay.
no one in that position.
What is the, as far as you know?
As
Okay.
far as I know.
Right. And what costs, how much do they cost? Do you know what it costs?
I
Ashfield
couldn't give you a
Boys?
cost because it would depend on the school
Can
size.
you give me, put on notice what it costs Ashfield Boys to put through these lockers?
Sure.
Because they're the best option, aren't they, really?
Well, the best
Question
option,
from
in
the
my
government.
view, is what
No
works best
question.
for the school community, and the school
And
community
to reduce
decides.
anxiety for kids.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
my daughter's school I tabled as a prime example where the option is in your bag and away, and the school community is happy with that option.
There's no questions from the government.
No questions from the government, which means we get a little bit of an early mark on our morning tea. We will resume at 11:15. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah,
So when, how much are they going to do?
And we're back. Thank you very much for returning, and I'm going to hand over to the opposition.
thank you, Chair. I might come to you, Ms Summerhayes, if that's okay. I want to talk about small schools and the closures of them. Can you just very briefly outline for me, please, the procedure that leads from a school to being put into recess?
Certainly. Good morning, Mr. Barrett. You would be aware that we have a number of small schools across New South Wales that serve diverse communities. And when we look at the viability of those schools, particularly in terms of parental need and what's available in the local community, and whether there's advantage to be going to bigger schools or not, there are times when we go to community consultation around the viability of a school moving forward.
And what triggers that?
It can be a reduction in student enrolment. It can be changes to a particular geography or a town in terms of employment and housing. There are lots of different reasons that we would look at small schools.
But practically, what is does someone look at the enrolments or something? Like, how does that come into fruition?
Sure. So each year we go through a process of looking at our small schools and looking at where they are sitting in their local community. And then, depending on the sorts of things I've mentioned to you, we might go out to consultation with community about the viability of that school moving forward.
So is there someone or some area that's job is to sort of look at the different schools and which ones might be coming up for that?
So it sits in public schools initially. So I might have a local director or a local principal or a local community or a P&C make a recommendation or ask a question. Sometimes when we are building other schools in other areas that might be close by, sometimes when transport arrangements change, we'll get communication from people on the ground about having a look at a school's viability.
And at what point along that chain do you start consulting or engaging with the local community, parents and potential parents?
Certainly. So when we look into a school and where it's sitting and some of the issues that have been raised, we will always go out to a consultation before any decision is made, because obviously all of the stakeholders in that community will have a view on the viability of the school.
How long has this procedure been in place? Has it been the same procedure for the last 10 years, or has it been updated recently?
As long as I am aware, Mr. Barrett, we've had a similar way of working. I've only been in this role for 12 months. I've known it as a director and an executive director, but as a deputy secretary, this is a model I'm really familiar with. It's something that I've seen happen over my years in education. I'm not aware there's been a shift. Yeah.
Can you tell me how many schools have been put into recess this year?
Yeah, I'll just check so I give you the accurate numbers.
And I am going to follow up and ask for, say, the last 5 years as well.
Okay, so I can let you know that schools closed in 2023. We had 5 of them. There are 2 that have been closed this year already. There are some schools that are in consultation moving forward towards the end of this year and early next year. And I'm really happy to give you those precise numbers if that's what you would like on notice.
Can I? So just when you say closed, do you mean put into recess or actually closed?
So actually closed with the numbers I just gave
Okay.
you.
What about put into recess?
So
Do you
put
have
into
those?
recess, I would need to. Well, let me just do a quick count.
I can help there.
Yeah,
There's
sure.
currently
Yep.
19 schools in recess.
Okay, and how long have they been in recess?
Well,
for?
some since 2017.
Yeah. So, but I guess what I'm trying to work out is in 2023,
Yeah.
and so far in 2024, how many have been put into recess for the first time?
In 2023, it looks like there was 4 schools that were put into recess.
Mm-hmm. And this year?
24, I don't have any figure in front of me, so we'll check.
Okay, so you'll take that on notice.
We'll check.
Okay. To your point just then, Ms Summerhayes, about further consultation happening for recess specifically in 2025, how many are on that list to be consulted for closure or recess in 2025?
On which list, sorry, Miss?
Well, you just said that
Mitchell?
there's also a number of schools that process is happening for towards the end of this year and early next year.
Yes.
I just want to know how many schools are on that list and which schools are they?
Okay, I'll provide that on notice.
Okay, so is there a list that you have to know which schools are being looked at to go into recess?
Yes.
Okay, would you be able to provide a copy of that list to
Yes.
the
Can I just
committee?
add to that, and it might help the committee? Those 19 schools that are on recess at the moment is out of a footprint of 2,216, and some of them date back to 2017. So
Yeah,
sometimes schools can come out of recess and reopen,
yeah, very aware
and
of that.
sometimes schools can then, from recess, be closed. We only do that if there's zero enrolments.
Yeah, thank you,
for
Mr. Disdale.
consecutive years.
I know that. I didn't ask
Yeah.
about that. So what I would like is the list of new schools that are intended to be put into recess either late for the end of this year or early next year. That exists and that can be provided.
So I can give you the list of schools we're consulting on.
Yes, that
You'd
would be
like
great.
that?
Yes, please. Thank you.
absolutely. And we have.
There's no. This might help the committee as well. There's no central list of schools we've got our eyes on to put into recess.
Okay, but there are some that are being consulted on. That's what I'm trying
Currently.
to
We
get
can tell you the ones
Yes.
under consultation.
So just on that, there's a couple of specifics I wanted to raise. The Avoca Public School down just out of Mossvale, is that one that's slated to be put into recess for next year?
It is.
And is it likely that that will not be operational for the start of the school year next year?
I'm not sure yet, Miss Mitchell. We're just finishing the consultation on Avoca.
And when were parents first informed of that consultation or that consideration of
I'd
recess?
need to take that on notice.
Okay. What's the normal time frame you would give parents?
Oh, I'm not sure there is a normal time frame.
Okay, so my understanding is that it's recent, sort of within this term, that parents have been made aware that that school might not be operational next year. That's not a lot of time for families to get their head around in terms of any changes. So when will that decision be made about that school next year, whether it will be operating day one, term one?
Let's come back to you with where we're
Yeah.
up to in the
Okay.
consultation. It's week 8 of the term, so I imagine we're moving quickly.
Yeah, and to that point, I guess parents are wanting to know what will happen next year for their children. In a similar vein, the consultation around Bribberee Public School, my understanding is I think there's a consultation session this afternoon for those families. But again, it's only been in very recent sort of days and weeks that was ever slated with those families. I guess my overall question is, why are people finding out so late that their children's school might not be operating next year?
Might be able to add to that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Anticipated enrolments for the following school year are due in mid-term 3 for each year, and the actual enrolments come out about week 5 of term 1. So normally what happens is you're in the middle of term 3, you put in what numbers you're anticipating, and then off the back of that, you'll get into territory around viability. As you've got dropping enrolments or no enrolments coming through or no kindergarten or no year 7, there'll be a natural point where there's discussion at the leadership level of the principal and the DEL to maybe look at these procedures, to look at the best education provision. So it's not unusual that, late term 3, early term 4, a process would start.
I
Yeah.
accept that. My concern is that what we're talking about, though, is late term 4. We're already in week 8. My understanding is through conversations with some of the local community members and parents that this has all come about in the last week or two. So to be told at middle of, you're a parent, I'm a parent, Mr. Disdale, if you're told midway through term 4 that actually your child's school might not be open day 1, term 1 next year, not a lot of time for them to make
No, really.
decisions. So that's the feedback we've had.
Yeah, I really respect that. I totally understand that.
Right. So when will there be certainty? And again, there are 2 examples, being Avoca and also down at Bribberee. When will those final decisions be made so parents will have certainty?
We'll
about
have to
what's
take the
happening?
process fully and let's go check where we're up to on the ground with that. We won't be rushing any process, and if it means we've got to make a recommendation that we're operating, that's what we'll normally do.
Okay.
But we'll have to consult with the community, get the views. I'm not even sure of the size of those schools, so let me go back and see. We make sure we speak to all the parents that are at the school and the prospective parents. You're not talking about a lot of parents because often these schools are very small in size when viability.
They still should be respected as parents.
But that's what I
regardless of
mean
if
by
they're at a small
speaking.
school.
Yeah, but that's what I mean by speaking with each of those current enrolments. So you might have 4 students, but we would want to talk to all those parents as well as any prospective parents. So we'll make sure we go check where we're up to, and we're doing that process thoroughly.
Did you want to ask something? Let's go.
So when is it okay to tell it? There's 2 months until school starts again, pretty much. and these kids still don't know where they're going to school next year.
Yeah.
When do you think should be the cut-off time that they get that certainty?
The earliest possible, in my view. But I've got to tell you, having worked in the organisation for 27 years, we've had situations where we've come back for day one, and had to say to a school community, there are no enrolments. No one has turned up, and we'll have to put a recess in until we can see what the state of play is. So, even across that summer break, you might have 2 or 3 kids enrolled in a school who then move over that summer break, and you come back and there are no enrolments. So, but in answer, generally, we'd want to give parents as much notice as possible. We understand that you'd want certainty about the school year.
Can I just ask one more quick? You talk about those 19 schools that are currently in recess, and you've mentioned that some of them reopened. How many schools have gone into recess and then reopened in the last 5 years?
We'd go back and check on that,
Thank you.
I know of 1 or 2 off the top of my head that have opened,
Yeah.
but let me go get you the names and the accurate number of those.
Yeah.
And that's why we stay in recess for a period of time, because school communities can regather by way of population and size before we make a move to close. And it goes to show that one of ours currently in recess has been that way since 2017, a good 7 years, and we haven't closed it. Yeah.
I wanted to just ask about Rankin Springs and their numbers in terms of student enrolments. Is it one of the schools that's been consulted on for closure or not at this point?
No, I think we've got about 18 students who've identified as being there next year, Miss Mitchell, and I'm really happy to tell you that we've now recruited a substantive principal
Yes,
who'll
I did
begin
see
in
that.
2025 as well.
Okay.
I know the community is really happy about that. So I thought you might ask me about Rankin Springs today, so I made sure I had that information
Thank
for you.
I appreciate that. And then just for Ivanhoe, my understanding is, and I appreciate there's a transport element here as well, but that as of next year there won't be a bus service available for students to go into Ivanhoe Central School. Do you know if that's correct?
I just know that there have been conversations around transport for Ivanhoe. I know the Director of Educational Leadership's been working with local transport and the principal.
Okay.
I'm happy to come back on where
Yeah.
those conversations are up to.
My understanding from some of the communities that I think there used to be 3 bus routes. Now this year there's 1, and then
Yes.
apparently next year there won't be any, which is obviously very
Yes.
challenging, large distances,
Yes,
isolated community.
indeed.
If there's anything on notice you could provide for that, thank you, that would be great. Probably to Mr. Disdale, I just want to move on now to suspension data. Is there any updated data you can provide the committee in terms of number of suspensions so far this year?
There might be. Mr. Graham might have it.
Yep, happy for
But
Mr.
can I
Graham.
just fix something on record that I said earlier to Miss Mitchell that related to suspensions?
Yes.
I said that suspensions had dropped, and I meant that suspensions had dropped for mobile phones.
Yes.
That
Not
was
overall.
Not overall, because overall our suspensions have gone up.
Yes, that's what I'm interested to know about.
So it's great for me to just correct that on the record that it was for mobile phones.
That's fine. What have you got?
Mr. Graham might have the data.
So the latest published data I have is the 2023 data, which was 60,000 suspensions across the system.
Okay, so there's an article from the 20th of November in the Daily Telegraph where there's several quotes from the Deputy Premier, and it's saying that preliminary data shows that there have already been 40,861 kids told to stay at home from school in the first 6 months of 2024. So where does that data come from?
So that would come from the department.
Right, so can you verify that figure's correct then?
I understand that figure's correct, but
Okay.
I don't have that breakdown in front of me.
Right, you just gave me the almost 60,000 from
That's right.
2023, the full year. But what you can see so far is for the first 6 months of this year, that number is up to 40,861. So suspensions
it's-
are up quite significantly.
It's a higher number than the same 6-month period the
Yes,
year previous.
right.
But it doesn't always play out that it's that you're able to forecast the end of year figure from that particular juncture.
Okay, so when will you have the end of year data?
So that will be published next year. So we
When
get to the end of the year.
roughly?
It's normally published sometimes certainly in the first half of the year.
Right. So the Deputy Premier has said that, and I quote, "We certainly don't mind seeing suspension rates rise." Has that been relayed to you as a department that you should actively be targeting higher suspension rates in schools?
One of the election commitments that this government had for education was that we would go back and revisit the student welfare wellbeing.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but is the outcome to then look at higher suspension numbers? That's what you're working towards achieving?
No. To deliver on that election commitment, I was asked as Secretary to make sure we consulted with all the relevant partners and that we restored back into that policy to meet the commitment that there would be settled, orderly, conducive learning environments across the school. And it was the view of stakeholders that when we were working with them, certainly the Federation, PPA, SPC, that there needed to be greater clarity around what could lead to a suspension,
Sure.
the categories
So-
of suspension. So, sorry, let me
No,
finish
thank you,
because
Mr. Dizzy.
important
Well, no, but I'm
question.
asking specifically about the numbers with respect.
Yeah.
We already know that the data is indicating that in that first 6 months it's higher. So my question is, should we expect to see, because of the policy changes that you've mentioned, higher suspension rates? And the Deputy Premier has said she'd like to see suspension rates rise. She's on the record.
Yeah, it wasn't a target or anything that we had to meet.
Right. In terms of that data, how many of those students have been suspended for bullying or bullying-related incidents?
I'm not sure we've got the categories in front of us.
So that's preliminary. We don't have the breakdown of those categories for that.
Okay, so there's no way to tell of that preliminary data how many of those children have actually been suspended for bullying. You don't have a record.
Not that
of
I have here today.
Right. Would you have that on notice?
Oh, we can have a look and
Let's
see
have a
what
look.
data we
Yes.
have.
what we've
Okay.
got.
Will that be available in the data that comes out in the first half of next year, a bullying?
Where,
We do have a breakdown in our published data.
Okay. But if you could take on notice how many of those 40,861 have been suspended specifically for bullying, that would be great. Is there still a high representation of Aboriginal children and children with disability in suspension data?
I don't have it in front of me, but remember this is preliminary for 2 terms, so we make sure that that's available. We're
Okay.
very transparent around our reporting, as you would know, around
Sure.
suspensions.
But I guess my concern is what's being presented in the public is that all of these children have been suspended, and it's in line with some media commentary around, the heading is tougher rules ban bullies from schools. But what you're saying today is you don't actually have a breakdown of how many have been for bullying. We don't know which young people are being suspended. We're not actually sure if that will be consistent across the year. So is it a bit preliminary to be using that data in media saying that tougher rules are banning bullies from school, because that's what's being presented?
Well, as a department, we provided that data to the Minister's office for the first half of the year, and it is factual that first half of the year data is higher than a similar comparison the year before.
Did the Minister's office ask for a breakdown of how many of those students had been suspended specifically for bullying?
I'd have to go back and see what data was requested and we provided, but that's data that we provide as a department.
But it's possible that from those numbers there hasn't been an increase, for instance, on young people being suspended from bullying, because you don't know you can't tell me, because it's preliminary data, what the breakdown is.
I can only speak to what we provided and what's factual. The 2 terms for this year, terms 1 and 2, the preliminary data says that that's higher on its suspensions.
But you don't know for what categories?
Well, we don't have that all available in front of us. We can go get that if needed.
Right. Okay.
And we do publish.
Yeah, but that's going to be sometime in the last... My point is you've got the
Yeah.
government in November saying these tougher rules are banning bullies from school, but as I hear it today, there's actually no data you can provide to the committee that backs up that claim.
Well, we don't have it in front of us.
Right. So it does exist though?
Well, we go see what we've got.
Okay.
That we
But if you've used it, if you've provided it to the Minister's Office for Media, surely it must exist, and therefore you can provide it to the committee.
Yeah.
How many students in the first 6 months of this year were suspended for bullying?
Yeah, and I stand by that data we provided. So
But
let's
can
go
you provide
back.
it to us? I want bullying specifically. Can that be provided to us? If it was able to be provided for a media article, surely you can provide it for this committee.
I said I'm happy to do so, and I said what's factual is that for the first 6 months, the 2 terms of this year,
Yes.
compared to the 2 terms last year,
Yes, but suspension
suspensions
can
have
be for a
been
range
higher.
of reasons, as you know, Mr.
They
Disler.
can be, yeah.
I'm interested in bullying specifically and whether there's actually been an increase.
Let's go back and
All right,
get that
well,
for you.
That would be great. I've only got 50 seconds left. But in terms of if a student is suspended for bullying, is the suspected victim or alleged victim and their family also informed that the student's been suspended for that purpose?
Look, my expectation around suspension is that both any perpetrator as well as any victim are communicated with by the school, and any relevant outcomes are indicated. That's what happens in any suspension. I wouldn't curtail that just for bullying. If an individual is suspended and there's a victim and perpetrators, or victims and perpetrators, then we expect transparent communication.
And what's the threshold of any reports to the police in relation to any bullying allegations or suspension procedures?
Well, we're pretty clear around anything that's of a criminal nature. We have seconded police that are with us in our incident reporting hotline. So if a school is unsure, they would contact the incident reporting hotline. They have to for a suspension, and would indicate what happened. And then they would get advice from the incident hotline, which may mean indicating to them that they need to contact the police because they may not have done so, or they may be indicating that they've already done so. So that's how we support schools in making police referrals.
Okay.
Thank you. Can I ask you about, interested in some questions around PES.
Sure.
So the procedure for handling allegations of misconduct against teachers and principals, is that the same regardless of the type of allegation? So, for example, something administrative versus something involving children in particular? Is there a difference in the way that those allegations are handled?
Yeah, Chair, there can be. We'd ring PES for advice, and PES might say, based on what we've got in front of us, we expect this to be locally handled, not handled by PES. They might make that decision, and in which case, if it was a principal, they might indicate that the Director of Education or Leadership or someone from Miss Summerhayes' area is to handle that matter. It depends.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be coy here.
No, that's all right.
It's complex space, so it depends on the nature of the allegation, the extent of those allegations,
Yep.
before they make a decision about whether they will manage the matter,
Yep.
or whether it will be locally managed.
So if it is managed by PES though, is it the same procedure regardless of the type of allegation?
If PES manage it, and they have two arms of management, one's for performance and one's for conduct.
Okay.
So if it's about the individual, in this case a principal's performance, there's certain procedures that apply.
Yep.
And if it's about conduct, then they go about their work with the allegations.
So if we're in the conduct category,
Correct.
presumably you could have conduct involving children versus conduct that's more administrative, such as administrative errors.
I understand you.
Yeah. So is the process for both of those categories of allegation the same within PES?
If it's child-related conduct, claims of sexual abuse, for example,
Yeah.
there is a risk management approach that is applied on whether that individual can be in the workplace or not while the investigation is assessed. It's normally in child protection matters. Normally the outcome is for them to be stood away from duty. And then with conduct that you said more of an administrative ground, for example, it might be financial or in relation to policy or procedure, it can be the case that they make an assessment that the person can stay in their role because it's not impacting on children while they are investigated.
Do you have, I guess, some data maybe that you could provide on notice in relation to how many teachers and principals who have been alleged, who have alleged misconduct, sort of claims against them, that are sitting, basically have received pay or are on leave with pay for those sorts of conduct matters that involve children versus those that are more of an administrative.
We should have that data, so I'm happy to come back to you.
Thank you.
For those that have been stood away from duty
Yeah.
on whether it's child-related or not child-related. I'm happy to come back to you.
Thank you. How many legal settlements with secondary or primary principals have been made out of court since the Tedeschi report, so in that period 2019 to 24?
Chair, we might need a bit more specific. When you say legal settlement, by way of, are you saying their performance or conduct's been put into question?
Correct.
And there's been a PES process, and the outcome of that PES process was a legal outcome.
Yeah, legal settlement.
Okay, I've understood the question, so let me get that on notice for you.
Thank you. Do those settlement sums come out of the department's budget, or is it an iCare issue?
Normally, if there's a legal matter at hand, it would have our government insurer iCare involved.
Okay.
We pay a premium like every agency would into that.
Okay, thank you. If you could come back to me on notice with how many settlements and also what the cost of those settlements has been over the last 5 years.
Definitely with what's available. Definitely.
Thank you.
I'll come back.
Can you also tell me if non-disclosure agreements are being signed by principals and teachers in that 5 years since the Tedeschi report, again in relation to these sort of settlement claims?
Yeah, and my general understanding of these as well, I'll come back on notice with the data, is that that's at the request of the individual.
Okay.
Large by far and wide in these matters, it's at the request of the individual. So let me come back to you with that data
Thank you.
if it exists. Yeah.
Can you also come back to me with how much the department has paid in the last 5 years because of costs awarded against the department after a civil claim from a teacher or a principal because of the PES process? So they've gone through the PES process and then they've claimed against you for damages. How much has been spent in the last 5 years?
So these, again, I just want to make sure I understand it so our people can get the right information.
Yep.
These are PES matters, teachers, principals, and as a result of the matter, there's been a civil claim come forward.
Yep.
And how much has the department paid for that civil claim?
Thank you. I'm just looking at a document. So I understand there was a document from June 2021, Department of Education document called Paving the Way Forward to Manage Underperformance Effectively. There's a graph in there that basically demonstrates that of 791 case closures of PES cases during that period, there were 180 principals and teachers left the profession as the reason that the cases were closed. So about a quarter had left before their actual settlement or closure of their case through PES. Is that statistic, I guess, is that sort of basically proportionate to what you would expect of the profession over that period anyway, or do you view that as being a product of the PES process?
Yeah, I don't have the document in front of me, but I would say this: we're 95,000 teachers, we're 2,216 principals, so I think proportionality is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, I don't have the document. You're referring to resignations, so that's an individual's decision. And when you're going through a matter and you're going through allegations, or you may have findings that are given to you, then you may make a decision as an individual around that. You might be facing, for example, in a matter, disciplinary action. That disciplinary action might be in its extreme dismissal, at other extremes pecuniary, and you might decide in your submission that you are prepared to resign given that possibility of outcome. Because what happens in these matters, and may not be well understood, Miss Boyd, is that the individual gets a chance to answer to those allegations, all the material evidence is assessed, and when there's a finding put forward, it's a proposed finding with a period for further submission. And in that period, in my experience, some people make a decision to resign from the organisation as opposed to possibly facing what may be stronger disciplinary actions.
Would you keep data on, I hear what you're saying, and I wonder if there's data that shows of the people that were going through a PES process and then resigned, how many of them, for example, then launched a civil claim against the department, or how many of them put some other kind of complaint in, just so we can see I guess the implication or the worry here is that the PES process has driven people to leave. Whereas I understand from what you're saying, there could be very valid reasons as to why a person would leave after having seen, the allegations against them or whatever. Is there a way to look at, is there any sort of data that you keep that we can...
If that data exists, I'm happy to provide it to you as chair of the committee. I want to go back and see if that exists. I certainly know that we've got case data, whether it goes to the extent that you're covering, because you're saying how many of those led to a civil claim and then what was the payments of that claim. If that data exists, I'm happy to hand it across.
Thank you. Are you able to tell me how many principals in New South Wales public schools were on formal principal improvement programs for each of the years, kind of in the last, 5 years? Is that something you keep data of?
Yeah, quite a small number, 2,216 principals, a formal performance and development program, formal improvement program. I'm happy to go back and get the number, but it'd be quite a small number. And that's not surprising to me. You were talking about one of the most educated and skilled workforces, all tertiary qualified. To become a principal in the system, you've been an exemplary teacher, you've demonstrated your capacity coming through at head teacher, AP, DP level. So generally they're really high performing, which is fantastic for the public education system. So you'll find it's very small numbers, but I'm happy to get you the exact number.
Thank you. Ms. Mahaley.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Dissart, just a couple of issues. I wanted to ask, Dr. Jennifer Buckingham, did
Yes.
you hire her this year into a particular position?
I'm delighted that Dr. Buckingham has joined our organisation.
Yes.
For
In
a-
what capacity?
She is our executive director in CC,
Okay. Where?
the Centre for Educational
Yes, sir.
Statistics and Evaluation.
Yes. Yep. Okay. And she came from Multilit, is that right?
Dr. Buckingham has had a well-noted career in the public.
Well, I'm looking at a LinkedIn page. She's been a long-term director of strategy with Multilit. Is that right?
That's what I understood.
Right. Okay. Does she still have shares in Multilit?
She removed all of her professional obligations out of Multilit.
Okay, so she
She's
no
no
longer
longer
has
associated
shares.
with it.
Yeah.
She
She
dec-
set up Multilit, didn't she?
She declared that when she came in.
Okay, but she's removed her shares, as far as you know.
As far as I know, she's removed all her involvement with Multilit.
All right. I'll come back to that. Can I just ask you also, I do want to follow up a couple of questions from my supplementary questions that I put to you and the Minister last time.
Sure.
And you might recall I asked you specifically about Legal Issue Bulletin 55,
Yes?
transgender students, kids. And when you go online, I think from memory, the response you provided me was the document was currently being reviewed and an updated bulletin would be available on 2025. It says the last time it was issued was in 2014 with some minor amendments in 22. Is this to... why is it being reviewed? Is this to reflect there have been two pieces of legislation passed by the Minns Labor government, the Conversion Practices ban and the Equality Legislation Act, i.e. self-ID changing sex legislation? Is that why there's a review on that bulletin?
We have a continuous cycle of review of all of our legal issues bulletins, so it's part of that cycle. And I just want to say this.
Well, no, but it said in there you made some changes in August 22. Prior to that, you hadn't made any changes since 2014. So it's not a document that's always under review, because for a very long period there was no review. It was always publicly available.
Yeah.
This is now, how long has this review been taking place for this particular
I'll see if
bulletin?
any of our people have got any... Do you have any information to this review, Mr. Martin? But there is a regular cycle of review where we look at our legal
Do you know
issues.
how regular? Because from
It's
2014
normally
to
a 5-year cycle.
2022, there was no review of that document.
Yeah.
Okay.
I take what you're saying.
Well,
Normally
it's on
there's-
your department website. I can read it out for you. It says there that there was, from 14, the next time there was a change was 22. So it's clear as day on your department site there. So how long has this document been under review for now?
So I want to go back if our people don't have the detail. Do you have any detail?
I don't have any further
No.
detail, but I understand it is
Let's
still
come-
under review.
Come back to you.
Well, yes, because you've said in my question to you about legal
I think
issue
we said early
bulletin,
25. Did we?
you said that it would be available. So I just wanted to ask, when did you, I asked you that question on the 27th of August.
Yeah.
So the document's still under review. When did that review start for the bulletin? Can we take that on
let
notice
me
if
get
you
you
don't
all
know?
those details. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Just because I'd like to know whether, I assume the reason it's under review is because the Minns Labor government's moved to specific bits of legislation, the Conversion Practices Ban and the Equality Legislation Act recently, which is specifically about self-ID and changing sex and so forth. So I'm assuming that's the reason why there's a delay in this review. Is that
Yeah, and plus we'll be getting the
Right.
views of our schools and our school communities. And I also want to say this on record to our transgender students: we see you, we embrace you, and we welcome you as part of the public education system.
Oh, okay.
And I want to get it right for you.
Well, I'm
in
not making any
supporting you.
comments in a disparaging manner.
No, no,
in
no.
relation
I
to
just
that.
wanna-
You don't need to make any additional statements. You can beginning of these sessions usually, but I just it's more about the. I mean, if you. As you embrace transgender kids, you might want to make sure there's a legal issues bulletin available for them that they can peruse.
Yeah, so
at the
that's
point
what-
at this point in time, it's locked away. That's why. So it's locked away, and there's no access to any bulletin in relation to this issue at the moment. So when do you expect that to be made available in 25?
So I think you read out we said early 25. So let me go back and see that we're on track.
Can we
for
get a
that.
better month? Any kind of dates in 25, or just 25?
Well, I think
Broad
my
date.
understanding was term 125. So let's make
Okay,
sure we
term
get
one,
that right.
All right,
Yeah.
we'll come back to that. Okay. All right. I'm just trying to think of any other questions that we might have had from our supplementary questions. Or I might also ask you, if you don't mind, and look, I appreciate this is a very new issue,
Sure.
and that's the social media ban that was passed federally, and I'm sure you're well on top of that issue. There was a process there where they had 24 hours, they allowed the public and presumably departments and others to make submissions. Did the New South Wales Department of Education make a submission to that inquiry that was held federally
It's
by the
not,
Senate?
let me go back and check. It's not ringing a bell. We might have contributed.
Could you also
to
check
this
for me
government
whether you
submission.
were invited? And you're the largest education department in Australia. I'd be interested to know whether the inquiry that was held by the Senate, whether you were invited,
Yeah, I'm
whether the
happy to
department
check.
itself was invited to make a submission.
I do want to thank the Premier for involving us and inviting us to the Social Media Summit, and for us being a key cog in education. I did attend the Social Media Summit, and it was an important discussion for our children and our parent community here
When
in
was
New
that
South
held?
Wales. It was earlier, I'm going to say earlier in term 3.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Did it talk about...
Not that long ago.
No,
It was
I'm
a
glad...
2-day summit. I attended the one in New South Wales.
Okay, no, I'm glad you've brought that to my attention, actually. I don't remember that being announced publicly, but I'm happy to ask some questions about it. So in relation to that, did you discuss the issue of banning social media at this particular summit? Was there a discussion about the concerns about this?
It was a
Social
summit
media?
that was co-led by New South Wales and South Australian premiers,
Yep.
and it had a range
They're
of...
very good friends, those two, yes. So
it was
what-
led by the two premiers.
Yes.
And there was a range of international experts that spoke about the impact of social media and mobile phones on young people.
Mm-hmm.
There was a number of workshops and discussion. There was the whole range of
Were
stakeholders.
you invited to make a presentation, Mr. Disdale,
Oh.
or just to attend?
I was proud to be invited alongside some of my colleagues in education to be part of the discussions that took place. And I know that the Deputy Premier attended as well,
Okay.
as the Education Minister and Early Learning Minister.
I just wanted to ask you, there was some, are you familiar with the Federal Senate inquiry into the social media ban? Did you follow any of that last
Only
week?
what's been in the press, yeah.
In the press? Okay. One of the issues that was raised was this issue around algorithms and the fact that young people are often redirected to certain sites and how dangerous that could be. Was that something that perhaps was also raised at this social media summit, just the way that algorithms operate to redirect people as they search certain sites into even further sites that could be fairly
remember
dangerous.
some
Is
of
that an
the-
issue that is of concern to the department?
Definitely recall some of the international experts talking about the addictive nature and
Yes.
how young people, when they're on particular websites, apps, the apps are able to read into those things that are of interest to the young person.
Are any of those apps does the Department of Education use? Were you able to work out whether there's apps that do this that the department also relies upon, or that teaching staff rely upon?
I mean, it's been well publicised what's been considered in the national domain around those apps. My apps relate to more educative, numeracy and literacy and things of that kind, which are not as exciting for young adolescents who are on, whether it's Snapchat or,
A lot of young people are on Instagram.
Instagram.
That's obviously now going to be banned, which will be really interesting for age groups like in year 11, where half the kids are 16 and half the kids are 17. So I don't know how schools manage that. But a lot of sporting groups and peer groups within schools, like for example, I'm sure you're aware of prefects. They have Instagram pages so that they can talk to each other. How is there an alternative that the Department of Education will provide? Because, for example, prefects talk to each other amongst other schools. I'm sure you're aware of that through an Instagram page they've set up in New South Wales. And that's a positive form of sort of social media where great young leaders talk to each other from one public school to another. I'm sure some of your principals or teachers will be aware of it. Is there an alternative that the department will provide for these young people to communicate?
We'll respect the expert advice in this space and enact that expert advice. When I represented Burwood United in the under-9s way back, there were no apps, and they still converse with me and my family, and I'm sure there'll be mechanisms where we can converse with young people.
Back to the opposition.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just get some clarification? Sorry, just picking
Sure.
up last time. Just some of the data that was in this article in the Daily Telly, and it probably goes to you, Mr. Graham. So the 59,814, they say it's students, but this is from last year's data, but that's total number of suspensions, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah, and students was 33,000. That's what's reported.
That's right.
33,900.
34,
So with the 40,861 that I appreciate is preliminary, and you're taking that on notice, is that number of suspensions or number of students suspended?
My understanding is that was number of suspensions, but
Okay.
I must say I don't have in front of me
That's
the
right.
information we provided to the Minister. So
If you could provide that on notice, that would be great. Okay, thank you. And then I just wanted to turn quickly to the Student Wellbeing Innovation Fund. Are there any further rounds of that funding intended to be made available at this point?
Mr. Graham, do you have any details on that?
no, I understand at the moment we don't have any further rounds of that funding.
Okay, and then for some of the organisations that did receive money, and I wanted to ask specifically about Gotcha for Life. I think they got $160,000. Has there been any conversations about continuing the work that they do in any public schools in New South Wales?
We have Mr. Graham will get the right terminology, an approved list of providers in the wellbeing space.
Yes.
So they might be on there, I'm not sure, we could check.
Do you know, Mr. Graham, if they're on that list?
I'm not sure if they're on this. I think they might be on our wellbeing provider list, but that would be schools would then purchase directly from them. Yeah.
Have you had any conversations with other agencies, and I'm thinking specifically mental health or through health, about any specific support packages for Gotcha for Life for the next school year for public schools?
I'm not aware of them, but that doesn't mean that they're not taking place. We can check to see if that's happening.
Okay, if you could take that on notice, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. I want to move now on to Mr. Martin. Don't worry, we weren't going to let you sit there all morning. HSC music drama syllabuses. I appreciate you were before the Joint Committee, I think just last week, in relation to some of the concerns that is coming certainly strongly to us from the profession about what's within those sort of draft syllabuses. Are there any updates you can provide us in terms of going back to the drawing board, starting again, further consultation, what's happening?
So thus far the syllabuses have been out since the 24th of October, and this is the draft, and they're due, that consultation period finishes on the 20th of December. I think that I made an announcement or at least a decision that was presented here on last Monday at the Upper House inquiry, and then also at a forum of drama teachers on Monday evening, that given the level of concern around the nature of the external assessment of the group performance, that it would be useful for us to change that consultation so that to make a decision in relation to consultation around the external assessment of that group performance to be reinstated. One of the reasons I did that was because some of the other changes proposed, were being ignored because of the level of activity around group performance. Some of it was not absolutely accurate. There was never a decision to move away from group performance. It would be silly not to have group performance as a major piece of assessment in drama, but the suggestion in the consultation paper was that group performance be assessed by their teacher at school because we believed that it was at least worth discussing whether that was an appropriate form of assessment, given that the teachers know the processes through which the students have gone in order to reach the group assessment stage. The level of unhappiness around the moving of the external assessment was to some degree gratifying in that the level of faith that schools have in that external assessment by NESA markers reiterates, I think, the confidence they have with the NESA assessment process. But it also meant that rather than hold on to that particular issue while this consultation period was occurring, it would be better to move away from that decisively so that other changes and other suggested changes could be assessed with I suppose, a more open mind.
Yeah, so and I appreciate the consultation's still ongoing for another couple of weeks, but those who are providing feedback on the current draft have been told that external assessment will still occur from NESA now, so not to sort of worry about that when they put in their feedback on the other parts of the syllabus. Is that?
That's my understanding. It certainly was heavily reported in the media. I'd have to take on notice what information we've provided to drama teachers in relation to that. But a lot of the consultation responses that we're receiving are in whole or in part around that external assessment, and I think that's ongoing. Okay. But we'll deal with every single consultation piece when they come in and when they're finalised and look through them very closely.
Okay. And just moving to the music change or draft changes, some of the concern that's coming through, again, from music teachers and that I've spoken to, but also a lot of you would have seen artists, musicians who are saying that they've got concerns about things like not having as many performance opportunities, longer written exams, not having composition anymore. What is the status of that particular consultation, and will some of those issues be looked at as well that are being fairly well documented in the media?
I think all of those issues will be closely looked at. Again, there is still, I think, some misinformation perhaps, I wouldn't go so far as to say that, but in relation to which would be assessed externally and which would be assessed internally. So the arguments have never been about not assessing performance in music, but about who is best to assess it or who's best placed. So that issue will be, of course, canvassed very closely when the consultation drafts are all concluded. The other aspects, place of musicology, numbers of options, the relationship of the oral exams to sit-down examinations, all of them are up for consultation, and all of them will be assessed really closely once we get to the end of the consultation period. And
does that include the composition part as well? So composition?
Yes, of course. Yep. All of it will be looked at.
Okay. And then could you just clarify, in terms of the draft syllabuses that have been released, were they signed off by the Minister before they were released for consultation?
Draft syllabuses are never signed off by the Minister. The syllabuses are signed off ultimately by the Minister. There is a separation between the work of NESA and the delegated responsibilities of NESA and the NESA board and its subsidiary committees and the Minister of the day. So it won't be until the syllabus is finalised before it goes to the Minister.
Was the Minister or her office though briefed on the draft syllabuses and their content?
I don't think there were any formal briefings in relation to any of the 50 syllabuses going forward. I'd have to double check that because my staff do conduct briefings.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that all of the draft syllabuses, 50 have so far gone through, and there's another 61 to go, have all proceeded from NESA through our curriculum and assessment committee,
Yes.
and gone out from there. And then it's not until they're close to finalisation and actually signed off that the minister gets the final copy.
Sure, but I would assume, well, maybe I shouldn't assume, but if you could even take on notice, I mean, presumably the Minister's office know that this is about to be released on this day, or there's some communication between NESA and the Minister's office in terms of when things are coming out.
There are a range of matters in relation to syllabuses, both prior to consultation and in the midst of consultation, that we have conversations with the Minister's office about. Given the amount of publicity around this issue, I have been in conversation with the Minister's offices in relation to dance, drama, music, but in relation to all the other syllabuses, I would have to go place on the record what actual conversations have occurred. I would say that it's never been the case that there's been interference, in my knowledge, not interference or even control or attempts to change syllabuses going back for the last 4 years. It's quite clearly established in the Act, the distance between the Minister of the day and NESA in relation to syllabuses.
Thank you. Just a question back on, small school closures. Tyrannoville Public School, I'm told, have been told this morning that they will be closing next year or going into recess, and that Avoca Public School will be told the same thing on Wednesday. Are you able to clarify whether that's correct, Ms Summerhayes?
I know that Tyrannoville and Avoca have been consulting this week, Ms Mitchell, so I'm happy to follow up on that information you've received.
Okay, that would be great, thank you. Do you want to just quickly do your...
Oh, yeah, sure. I'll just jump in. I don't want to spend too long on this, if that's okay. And possibly just looking at titles, it might be for you, Mr Graham. SLSOs, teachers' aides, they're to provide assistance to kids that need that additional support.
That's one of their roles, yeah.
Okay. Is there an expectation they also provide... So they're allocated to a student?
No, so they're employed by a school. So in some cases they will exclusively work with one student, but they may work with a number of students or with the teacher in the classroom.
And how is that decided, whether they're for one student or...?
So it depends on the school organisation, depend on the level of funding, so the level of need of the student. So SLSOs, might be a school for specific purposes with kids with very high needs. You might have one teacher and you might have 3 or 4 other adults, often whom be SLSOs. So it will depend.
So there can be an SLSO that is, I guess, attached to an individual student?
They're not. They'll be employed by the school, so they're not attached to the individual student, but they may work exclusively with one student.
And it's the school that determines that?
That's right.
Okay, and if that is determined, is that funded just through the...
So there's a number of... so it might be funded through a student's individual funding, through the integration funding scheme, but the schools themselves now receive what's called the low-level adjustment for disability funding. So they'll receive money for their students, and they will be able to employ, SLSOs or a number of SLSOs from that funding, if that's what they need for the school.
Mr Barrett, if it helps, there's a multitude of ways that an SLSO might be employed. Another bucket is the tutoring program. So the school might decide for those kids that have got a gap in reading and numeracy, that they want an SLSO to support the program. So that might be another reason. In a high school I led, we ran a boys program for Year 9, the boys that were at risk, where we were looking from school to pathway. We employed an SLSO to exclusively lead that work alongside a teacher who supervised it. So there's a multitude of ways, including a student with disability or students with disability.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. Can you tell me how many schools currently have bottled water provided to them for their main water source?
Happy to go back and get on notice.
So I think as of December 2022 it was 31, but I'm just wondering if there's any updated figures, but if you can provide that
Was
on
that
notice.
2020? What did you say?
December 2022.
Okay.
I think there were 31, but I'm just wondering if
Happy
there's
to
any
get an
more left.
update for you.
And has there been any more work done? You might remember, Mr. Disdar, that there was a pilot that we did, I think it was back in 2021, with hydro panels and looking at opportunities for sort of collection of water rather than relying on bottled water. There hasn't sort of been any further work in that space as far as I know, but are any alternative methods or new technologies being investigated along those lines for those smaller
Yeah.
remote schools that don't have access to
I do recall
water?
that work, but
Yeah.
let me go back because there's a number of initiatives, particularly at our school infrastructure around sustainability stuff that we've been doing. So let me go and see.
Yeah, I mean, and this was specifically for those remote schools
Yes.
that don't have access.
Yes.
If you could provide any information about that on notice, that would be great. And also, if there's any data around how regularly water tests are undertaken at particularly regional and remote schools in terms of water quality for the drinking water.
I think it'd be on a risk matrix, so let's go see what we've got.
Thank you.
Those that might be at more risk of geographical factors
Yes.
would have a closer examination than those that are not.
Okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to race through a couple of quick ones if I can. Just with the Bungendore High School, obviously there was an announcement to change the location. How much additional funding has been allocated to that school? The original budget, which is listed in the budget papers, is $71 million, but that was obviously with the old site. How much extra has been allocated for the new site and the new school?
So this is the Birchfield Drive site that we've acquired as the
Yes.
new site, and we're design and planning work underway with an anticipated opening in early 2027. In terms of the land cost, let me take that on notice. I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, so if you could provide on notice how much the new site cost was, and also what's the overall increase to the initial budget of $70 million, given that I think there was already close to, I think the budget paper said that, there was 16.9 million had been spent until the end of the last financial year. So you've obviously got less than 70 million left in the kitty. Keen to know what the new funding allocation will be. Are there also any timeframes for when plans for the new school site will go on public exhibition for the community?
I think we've got work underway now that it's only been very recent that we've secured the site. And so given that we've secured the site, I think we've got design work that is underway. As soon as that's available, we'll go through the steps of the process where there's public viewing and
All right.
call for submissions, etc.
Can you take on notice when you
I'm happy
expect
to
that
take
to
on
be?
notice,
Thank
yeah.
you. And then just another new school, Medowie High School. I understand there's been some community consultation in the last few weeks. Is there any update in terms of whether that school will start with Year 7 students only?
We're a way away from opening there. Do you know, Miss Summerhays? Let's come back.
Okay. If you're taking that on notice, can you also indicate how many enrolments you expect there to be for Medowie when construction will begin, and also when a principal will be appointed?
Yeah, so normally we appoint, I can tell you the principal part if you like. Normally
It's
we
normally
go
about a year out.
a year
Yeah.
out from
Yeah.
the principal, and I'll tell you, I'll go back
Yeah.
and find out how big the school's going to be. 'cause
Thank you.
that's
And
the-
catchment intake area as best as you can as well.
Probably we won't have that nailed down, but I'll see what we've got available,
Okay.
and then with what year groups we'll start with.
Thank you. Just with preschool capital funding, there's currently I think a Building Early Learning Places program that's out. I think it's through the Early Childhood Education and Care Fund. Is that correct?
Let me get the details for you. Mr. Barakat will be all across it.
Okay. If you could just take on notice, my advice is that services have been told that this grant is part of a test and trial program, and beyond that there are no guarantees for future capital works grants for community preschools. I just would like some clarity
I'll get the
on that.
detail. I mean, it's not unusual for us to want to test and make sure that there's an
Sure.
evidence base that it works before we...
But it is unusual for there not to be a capital works grant available for community preschools. That has been in place for some time. So I'm just curious to know whether that will continue for community preschools, separate to the 100 department preschool. I'm talking about specific community preschools that run independently.
Yeah.
We've just had some concerns raised, also from areas that are recovering from natural disasters as well, that the funding opportunities are not there, and we'd like to know where that's all up to.
Well, let me come back.
That would be great, thank you. The issues around the number of, Catholic or independent non-government schools, there was an election commitment, this is still in the early childhood space, there was a commitment that there would be, I think it was $60 million for 50 early childhood services on non-government school sites, to also support families who choose to send their children to non-government schools. Is there any update as to where they will be, when they will be built? My understanding is it was an election commitment for this term of government, and we're nearly halfway through and it's been fairly quiet.
Yeah, no, let me go get detail. I must admit I've been fixated on the 100 public preschools and what's under my purview to deliver, but that's an election commitment. We have to deliver on it. It's still
Yes.
there, so let me get the update for you.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Rachel, did you have anything that you wanted? I can keep going, but you're up? Okay, thank you. Just trying to work out what I can do in a short period of time, because there's quite a bit here. Oh, Mr. Martin, I might go back to you in the 1 minute, 20 seconds I have left. In terms of students learning about financial literacy, things like superannuation, taxation, etc., there is, I think, still a program running in government schools where schools can elect to be part of the financial literacy challenge. I'm assuming that still exists, yes? But where specifically in the curriculum do students learn about those areas of, I guess, general sort of financial literacy?
I think that there are elements of the K-6 HSIE syllabus, but I'll take that on notice and have some specific details for you. It's certainly in commerce, and probably in other parts of the 7 to 10 syllabuses, and then of course there's economics as an elective subject.
Could you take on notice and provide a breakdown of the specifics and what sort of gets taught in what year groups, and if there's any changes to that with any of the new syllabuses that are rolling out as well, whether there's more or less of that content?
I will absolutely, of course. There would also be applications in maths that relate to things like percentages and being able to calculate things that would have application in terms of financial literacy. So I'll get that list for you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any data on the financial literacy challenge and how many schools are taking part in that?
No.
Oh, you have it?
Sorry?
No, I don't have it.
Oh, dear. We'll go back and see.
Okay, thank you.
I'll throw to Ms Mihalik first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. just back on a couple of questions that we were discussing. Just could you let me know, because I think we left with that discussion about the positives around Instagram and some schools and school students using it as a way of communicating with other students, because obviously students don't really use WhatsApp, which is what the parents rely on. If you can let me know what alternative the Department of Education will provide to those schools.
Yeah, what
to
we'll
those
be
students.
considering and examining.
And, I mean, imagine, have you had any, I imagine you're going to get a briefing from the federal department in relation to this, or the federal minister. Has there been any kind of discussion about
imagine that's
you'll be
something-
briefed as a department about this ban?
Yeah, I imagine we'll all be briefed.
In the next.
Yeah, particularly for education ministers' meetings. I imagine we'll be briefed there.
Okay, but there's been no correspondence to date. And I don't expect there to be, but there's been nothing from the Federal Communications Minister or department at all. And you're going to come back to me on whether you're invited as a department.
Yeah, we took
given
that
how
on
large your
notice.
department is.
We were
to
heavily
make a
involved in the
submission.
social media summit here.
That's the
Yeah,
New South Wales.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
were you speaking at it, Mr. Disdar?
Well, myself and several.
Was anyone from the department, if you were heavily involved in the social media summit, were you or a member of the department invited to be a speaker at the Premier's social media summit?
Well, it was great to be involved because there was international
Hang on,
experts.
was anyone from the department, if you were heavily involved,
Yeah.
were you invited to be a speaker?
We weren't a keynote speaker. No.
You were not
No.
speakers, right? So nobody from the department was invited to be a speaker at the Premier's. So the Premier of New South Wales did not ask anyone from the New South Wales Department of Education to make a presentation
I think
or a keynote speech at this summit.
I think in fairness, There was international experts
Who
are leading.
Do you know of anyone?
Well, I'm
off
sure
the hand?
the agendas, we can get you the agenda, I'm sure.
Well,
Yeah.
but you're heavily involved. Do you remember a speaker in particular, Mr. Disdale?
Sometimes it's beneficial not to be a keynote speaker and just to be able to participate.
But do you remember any speakers?
and
How long
tap
were you
in.
there for?
And tap into the
How
expertise.
long were you there for, Mr.
I was there
Disdale?
for about half of the day.
Okay. Do you
And
remember
some
any
of
of
my
the speakers
people were
while
there
you
for
were
the
there,
entire day.
Mr. Disdale?
I can recall some of the topics covered,
But
but
nobody comes to mind. A particular speaker doesn't come to mind.
Well,
This amazing
yeah.
social media summit that you were heavily involved in, as you just indicated earlier, and you can't tell me a particular speaker.
No, I mean, I can't remember the name, but I said to you
must
that,
have been amazing.
that it was quite fruitful to hear the international expertise.
Well, you don't remember who they were. Can you name anyone?
Oh,
I imagine most of them were actually Australian speakers, weren't they? I mean, they couldn't have
happy
just
to go
sourced
back
everybody
to
from,
the
the
agenda.
from overseas. All right, okay. Well, thanks for that bit of info about
Can
the
I
social
just
media
fix up
summit.
one other
Can
thing
I-
for you that you asked, Miss Mahalik? You asked about Jennifer Buckingham. I can confirm, I've had it checked, that she has no financial or professional interests in multi-lit.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Disdale.
Thank you.
Can I then just a couple of quick things that I just want to wrap up with what I put information that I'd like to get back. But just on that legal issues bulletin that I raised earlier, if you can come back to me on the date that you expect that. You said term 1 of
Yeah, I'm expecting
2025.
term 1, yeah.
Right. I'd also like to know who undertook that legal issues bulletin review within the department, which section of the department, or if you are relying on any external parties to help with preparing that bulletin.
Yeah, it'll be led by our legal directorate, but I'll get
If you can let me know, or obviously let
get advice to you if it's.
I'd like to know if any external parties' advice or assistance is relied or will be relied upon in preparing and finalising that bulletin, please. And what the cost, if you do undertake external support or assistance with that bulletin, I'd like to know what the cost of that would be.
If we've engaged anyone, I'll
If
let
you
you
have
know.
engaged, yes, and
Yeah,
the
and the
costs
cost of
associated
that.
with that. All right.
I should also let you know at the summit, the Deputy Premier presented and spoke.
I'm glad you remembered that now.
Yeah. I don't have
It's
the
your
agenda.
boss.
I don't have the agenda
Were
in
you
front
there?
of me.
Were you in attendance for that? For her
I
speech?
was, yes.
Okay, but you couldn't remember her speech earlier. All right. Okay. Thank you. That's enough for me.
Thank you. Can I ask you some questions about the Smart and Skilled program?
You can.
Can you tell me what the priority groups of learners are for the Smart and Skilled program?
I'll make sure I get you all the correct details, but there are equity groupings.
Mm-hmm.
There are our learners with disability, Aboriginal learners, learners that are rural and remote. But let me get you all accurate categories.
Thank you.
And there's loadings that are applied to those learners.
Okay.
Yeah. If it's okay, I'll come back on notice.
Thank
Chair.
you. Did Try a Trade sit under the Smart and Skilled program?
Let me check that. Is there something specific you want me to check in relation to it?
Yeah, I just want to know if under that Smart and Skilled program there was funding for VT service provision in youth justice centres.
Okay, let me check for that.
Yeah, thank you. If you could come back then on what current skills and trades programs are running in the youth justice centres.
Yeah.
And how much the Department of Education is funding them
Yeah,
for.
definitely. I'm happy to do that because I've been to a number and there are trade training centre type operations in some of these youth justice centres.
Yep.
So that students can come out with qualifications and skills to enhance employability. I'll come back to you with what's in play at each of our youth justice centres.
Thank you, that'd be really useful. And if you could also tell me sort of what the evaluation of that Try a Trade program has been like, how it's been assessed, what the results have been.
Sure.
That would be very useful. Thank you. If I could turn to you, Mr. Martin, just in relation to the announcement yesterday, I think it was, in relation to the review of HSC disability provisions. Obviously, we covered those issues a lot in our PC3 inquiry into children with disability in schools. So I'm pleased to see that there's been some movement on that. I saw in e-tender that a tender has been given to Urbis Limited for $712,000 to do that review.
Yes, that's correct.
Can you tell us what that sort of $712,000 will cover exactly?
The consultation or the consultant hired or the tender is in relation to making sure that all of the various disability groups are spoken to and that we have a comprehensive report about the current strengths of the program and obviously any suggested changes. So all the peak disability groups, the Aboriginal Education Consultative Group, the disability groups cross-sectorally, the three sectors, principals, activists in the space, potentially former students who've been engaged with or had disability provisions provided to them. They will then, after they've conducted those consultation processes, direct consultation processes, produce a report for us.
Okay, all right. That sounds quite promising then in terms of the consultation process. So we're looking at this being delivered in a year. I think it was September. Maybe
Yes, next year.
25?
We'll do it as early as we can, but
Yeah.
we want to give proper and due consideration to the various groups, and we will get that information back and the report back and recommendations as soon as we can.
Yeah, good. Okay, and then we're looking at 2026 HSC.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of other random ones. So the Auditor General released a report into internal controls and governance. And one of the issues identified was the governance of gifts and benefits. Are you able to provide a copy of the department's gifts and benefits register? This is something I've been asking a few different departments. And also any information that you hold in relation to lobbyists and lobbyist meetings?
Sure.
Thank you. There's another e-tender record for Accenture being awarded a contract to do business process automation. Can you tell me for almost $273,000, can you tell me what that business process automation project is, and are we expecting jobs to be cut as a result?
Is this in the Department of Education or NESA?
Mhm.
Department of Education?
Yep.
Okay, well, let me go back and get details for it.
Okay, thank
But
you.
it's got nothing to do with the structures that I've been doing. I have brought no one in to work on the structures. We've been working ourselves as deputy secretaries and secretaries on the structure.
Okay, thank you. Last year, the department engaged MKG Consulting to deliver a procurement operations manual. Has that been delivered, that manual?
Just repeat that again, Chair.
MKG Consulting to
Yep.
deliver a procurement operations manual. Was
Let
one
me
of last
go
year's
back and
questions.
check with procurement.
Thank you. I'm just checking my other comments. Just in relation to the, sorry, back to you again, Mr. Martin, just in relation to that project with the review, are you able to make the terms of reference for that review available to the committee?
Whatever was involved in the tender process, and we can, of course, provide.
Thank you. And will a version of the report be made public when it comes back? Do you know?
Look, I can't answer that question at the moment, but I'll take that on notice as well.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right. I think that will do me for now. I might come back and do a couple of minutes at the end, but we'll...
Yep. Thank you, Chair.
to you.
Mr. Tisdale, this one's probably for you.
Okay.
The now Premier and also the Education Minister in February 2023 made a commitment that they would look to offer the IB at public schools in New South Wales. Can you update the committee where that work's up to?
Yeah, sure.
Or
Graham, do you
Mr.
have
Graham,
any
whoever's
details on
most
the
best
DIB?
placed.
Yeah, so we're currently looking at how we'll operationalise that. So we hope to provide schools with advice on that.
Okay, so we're nearly halfway through the term of this government, and there still hasn't been. The now minister said at the time that there'd be a opportunity for an expression of interest for individual public schools. Is there a time frame on when that will happen?
So we're currently working on how the commitment's going to be met within public schools.
Okay, has the minister given you any direction in terms of a time frame of when she would like to see the IB offered in more public schools?
So
All the election commitments are, virtually day 1, term 1, 27 for delivery.
Okay, including this one? So day 1, term 1, 2027 schools will be offering, some more, or public schools will offer the IB in New South Wales?
No, that we'd have worked through and met that election commitment. There's quite a bit of work to do because...
I appreciate that, but the election commitment is that the schools will be given the option of running the IB. We're virtually at the end of the second year of a school year, certainly for the new, or not so new government. It's going to take time to implement that in schools. So will students in 2027 be able to do the IB in public schools?
We'll need to do that work and present it to government. We've got 78 education election commitments to deliver, and we're at work on all of them. Yeah.
I appreciate that, but at the moment there's no expression of interest. If you've got a public school that wants to offer the IB, still working through the logistics of that. And I appreciate it's a large logistical undertaking, but we're halfway through and there's not even a process yet.
Yeah, I've led a school in my career overseas that offered the IB, so I know
Fabulous,
what it
Mr.
takes.
Disdar, but I'm asking when it's going to be. That was the commitment last year, February 2023, that it would be available, and it's been radio silence for all but 2 years.
We're running hard on all 78 election commitments. We'll go back to the government with our advice on this one.
And on this specific one, when would you anticipate giving the government advice about the implementation of running the IB?
Yeah, I don't want to nail myself to a time frame. We'll work on it. I'm happy to come back to the committee. We come back in March. We should be closer around some of the work we're at around it.
So I'll just ask again for complete clarity. In 2027, will state schools in New South Wales, public schools, be offering the IB?
I'll need to meet the election commitment. That's
a yes, they will be?
I'll need to meet that election commitment.
Okay. So is it a yes?
I'll need to do the work and present to government how we would meet that election commitment.
Okay. How many of the 78 election commitments that you're talking about have been delivered so far?
I'll get you the exact number on notice. Yeah.
Thank you. And which ones they are that have been met already?
Sure, we should have that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, the temp to perm one's an example.
Yeah, but work had started on that, to be fair, prior to the election. But
I'm happy to take on notice and come back to you with which ones we've met. Yeah.
That would be great. Thank
and
you.
also just let you know about Medowie, because I've got advice on
Yes,
Medowie.
please.
Would you
Thank
like
you.
to know that? We'll be recommending Year 7 as a kick-off, and we've got to deliver that for day 1, term 1, 27.
Okay. And when would you anticipate, I appreciate you said principal about 12 months out, catchment areas, when?
Yeah, so I think we'll be looking to recruit the principal in term 4, 25 for a 26 start.
Yes.
And give the principal 1 year runway.
Yes.
And I think it'll be very remiss if we try and nail down the enrolment catchment right now, even though there'll be work on it.
But when would that be something that you would think the principal would do once appointed? Is it usually sort of within that 12-month period, or
we'd
what's your
normally
timeframe?
want to do some heavy lifting and take that to the principal so we can start taking enrolments, ideally, in the first half of that school year.
Okay, thank you. Just going back to another election commitment, one of your 78.
Sure.
Prior to the last election, again, the minister made some public commentary around a new co-ed high school in the eastern suburbs and said that would be delivered. Where's that work up to?
Are you referring to the Ramwick consultation?
No, I'm talking about prior to the election. The minister is on the record, and I can pull up the article, saying that they would look at, that a Labor government would provide a co-ed school in the eastern suburbs.
Yeah, I want to go back and check the wording. My understanding was that we'd look at co-ed provision, and we've undertaken the Ramwick consultation, and the Ramwick merger is commencing next year. We're up in Year 7 enrolments, which is fantastic. It'll be a growing school, so I don't want to answer to. I want to make sure I can go get the accurate wording, unless you've got the wording in
I
front of
do.
you.
Yep. So in November 2022, in a Sky News interview, the now Minister Prukar said, and I quote, "We're certainly not going to be closing any single-sex school or anything like that. Something that we've said we would do in the first term of government is we find a way to build a co-ed high school in the eastern suburbs." So I'm asking about that commitment. On the record, November 2022, that they would build a co-ed high school in the eastern
Let
suburbs.
me go
So-
check the exact wording in the government commitments, not what's reported in Sky
Well,
News.
it's a direct quote from the Minister on Sky News, so
Sure.
it's from her mouth. It's not being
Sure.
made up by a journalist.
Yes,
It's
I
there.
wanna
And it was
get-
reported again in the Sydney Morning Herald as well.
Yeah, I'm not trying to not answer the question. I'll come back and give
Okay.
it to you on notice.
Okay.
But pleasingly, we're underway with what the co-ed provision looks like at Randwick.
Yeah, but that's a restructure of an existing two schools, not a new co-ed high school being built.
And I'd just add, quite successful given what parents are indicating by way of enrolment
Okay.
for next year.
So you might be aware, Mr. Disdale, that the federal member in that area, Allegra Spender, has been doing some work with an architect around a proposal at the Edgecliff Centre for a public-private high school. Have you been involved in those consultations? Has the Deputy Premier met with that particular federal member about a proposal to build a co-ed high school at the Edgecliff Centre?
No, I've only read about it in what was reported in the newspaper.
Right.
I can't answer for whether she's met with the Deputy Premier or not. I'm not sure.
Could you take that on notice as to whether there's been any conversations with the federal member, Allegra
I'm gonna
Spender,
take
and
it
the
up.
government?
Is that best
Point
put
of
to the
order.
Deputy
It's a
Premier? I'm not
question to
sure.
I'll hear the
to
point of order.
Minister.
Yeah, but he can
Not-
take it on notice. It's
It's a
not.
question to the Minister about her diary and her, so I think it's appropriate, if you want to put on notice to the Minister.
Well, with respect, the Secretary could take it on notice, and I would assume if the Minister was meeting with an MP about a school infrastructure
It's a question
project,
to
there would be departmental
it's
advice.
a question to be directed to the Minister. not to the
Okay, I'll
Secretary.
rephrase it. Has the department provided any advice to the Deputy Premier about a potential public-private school proposal to be built at the Edgecliff Centre?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Has the school infrastructure had any consultations with that federal member, Allegra Spender, about a proposed school?
Not that I'm aware of, but I'm happy to check that.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of school air conditioning, can you just confirm that the Cooler Classrooms program has finished and it's not ongoing and open for funding applications from schools?
That's my understanding. There was a bit of remnant work left over, but the program is completed.
Okay. Is there currently a mechanism for schools to apply for funding specifically for the purposes of having those aircon heating, air ventilation units installed in their schools like they were able to do under Cooler Classrooms?
They can through the work with their asset service officers. So there's one, there's been an improvement in the number of asset service officers. There's one asset service officer for every 10 schools.
Yeah, but is there specific money for those installation of those air conditioning systems for schools?
So in working with the asset service officer in prioritising the needs of the school, they can make that the top priority.
Sure, but there used to be a separate $500 million fund, as you'd be aware, which was Cooler Classrooms. So schools have always had their asset funds and they can apply for what they prioritise. That's not new. But there was a separate bucket of money under Cooler Classrooms specifically for aircon heating and cooling, as you would know.
Yeah.
Is that separate bucket of money available to schools anymore
That
or not?
5-year program came to an end at
Okay.
2023.
And there isn't anything new to replace it for a specific air conditioning
We haven't
program?
replaced it with any other separate bucket. We've been doing it through our asset service officers and saying if it's a priority for the school, you can nominate that as a priority.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do I keep going, Chair? Or are we...
Yeah, you
Yeah, okay. I just wondered whether the Department of Education's been involved at all or asked to participate in the drug summit. The Sydney one is this week, and there's also been Griffith and Liz Moore, sort of not hearings isn't the right word, but meetings. Has there been any involvement from the department in that?
We have, yeah. Mr. Graham might have
Yes,
details.
So Laura Milkins, the Executive Director of Inclusion and Wellbeing, is attending that summit.
Okay, so, and have you been asked to provide any, or has the department been asked to provide any insight, or is it more just sort of attending and gathering feedback?
I'm not sure about any background work that took place
Okay.
in that. I can get back to you
If
on
you could
that.
take that on notice, that would be great, thank you. And then I just have one quick one, and then I'll hand back over to my colleague we don't have a lot of time left, but, actually no, I have two quick ones. Googong High School, is there a start date yet for the construction of that project?
I'll find out and come back to you if that's okay.
That's fine.
We
and
do
then,
update all our projects on our website for the school community, so let me go back.
Yeah, thank you. And then also for Jindabyne Education Campus, is there a completion date for the high school and the primary school there?
I'm happy to come back if that's okay, Miss Mitchell.
That's okay. When you're taking that on notice, could you also just provide whether there have been any changes to those plans in light of the government's decision to make some, well, effectively abandoned, but the Snowy Mountain Special Activation Precinct, because you'd remember a lot of that was linked with the new school, and there was some community infrastructure work that was happening around that as well. My understanding is from the SAP part of it, that's sort of been put on hold, and I'm just wondering if there'll be an impact then on the school delivery there.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back. We're committed to building the primary and the high school, but are you asking about the specifics of where that
Just whether there's
funding's
been any impact as well in terms of those projects, but from the educational perspective, you're saying no.
No,
Okay, thank you. I'll
we've
just
still
have
got the funding to go and build both schools.
that. Okay. Did you want to add anything, Miss Summerhayes, or not?
Sorry?
You didn't. did you
I was
add
just going to add, Miss Mitchell, that the schools are preparing to make the move for day one, term one next year, at
Okay.
the end of this year.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I'll hand over to Ray.
Thank you. If I might be able to pick up the issue of bullying in schools, if I could.
Sure.
And Mr. Disdar, happy to start with you or be directed.
Sure.
And I guess I just preface this by just recognising the level of community and parent concern on this issue in the current environment. Mr. Disdar, how do New South Wales schools address reports of, alleged bullying, in the relevant school environment?
Yeah, we've had a long-standing zero tolerance view for bullying in public schools in New South Wales. Again, I've got to give credit to schools. They do a remarkable job in stamping out bullying and leading with respectful and safe structures in their schools. Schools aren't cut adrift from society. They can be impacted heavily with what happens in society. And it's concerning that there's a growing prevalence of this in society. So you're following all the debate and discussion where there's been a national call for a review and examination of bullying by the Education Minister, the Federal Education Minister, a review on what works and what can be improved. And here in New South Wales, the Premier and Deputy Premier have come out and said they're looking for a stronger framework to apply across all of the sectors, both government and Catholic and independent schools, and that'll be part of work in what's known as the Schools Advisory Committee, where they are the three sector heads for public education, Catholic education, and also for independent schools to work through with the Minister of the day and with our NESA colleague in Paul Martin, given that NESA is cross-sectoral. Mr. Martin might want to make additional comments.
Just in terms of the current arrangement today, what's happening, what's
So
in place?
in my system, it's zero tolerance.
So what's in place today? In terms of incidences of bullying, is there a process where they're recorded or reported to the Department of Education?
Well, we just covered earlier, if it's a suspension with a formal disciplinary action, there's categories for recording, and then schools have mechanisms for recording what are entries of incidences in schools, as well as our incident reporting hotline at the centre. So
I
there's
guess
a
my
multitude.
question, just being specific on the bullying, I think we established earlier, but the suspension, we didn't have knowledge if that was specific to bullying.
Not quite, Miss Merton. We said we had the suspension figures, but that we'd go back and see what the breakdown was in the categories.
But in terms of individual, like incidents of specific bullying, is there a reporting process relevant to that?
There is. There is at a school level.
Yep.
There is at a system level through the incident support hotline as well.
Thank you. And in terms of resources to the school for anti-bullying, education, materials, I'm just wondering what is available today to sort of equip, empower schools to want to be taking a greater interest in this?
Yeah, Mr. Martin, Mr. Graham might add more to this, but in the area of cyberbullying, we've got a well-renowned Cyber Marvel online safety awareness program. We also partner with the E-Safety Commissioner. We've got the behaviour code in place. And for bullying in general, Mr. Graham might have the range of resources, not only through the curriculum, but additional that we make available.
So we provide a range of resources. We're also strong kind of leaders in the bullying no way national approach as well. So we provide funding and support for that, and all those materials are available not just to our students in schools, but to schools across Australia. So we're very much part of a national support effort as well.
Yeah. And Mr. Graham, schools report that relationships with local schools and local police are effective in educating kids and equipping them. Is there some arrangement by the department to assist in this, or is it up to the individual school?
So we have materials available, but often schools have, because they'll use, for those police in schools programs, they'll use local police who are local to that area, and the police very much operate a local command area. So that's done through Ms Summerhayes and the schools areas and the local area command.
Yep. Thank you. To Sarah.
Thank you. Just quickly back to the IB, just to you, Mr. Graham. Has there been any work done on what the costings would be to run the IB at an individual high school?
I don't have any costing for an individual high school for how much it would cost to run the IB.
Okay, what about, have you done any work for costings across the system to offer the IB?
Yeah, I've been in this role for 12 months, so I'm not sure about the costings that might have been done to run the IB.
Okay. Could you take on notice whether any work has been done and any figures that you have around the costings to run the IB?
We're happy to take that on notice.
Thank you. And just in the 30 seconds we've got left, do you have any updated data in terms of teacher vacancy numbers, Mr. Distar, as of today or more recently than term 3?
I only had that term 3 week 2 data, so please let me come back on notice. We'll do it
So you
quickly.
cannot get it to us today? It's not
That's
in
all
front
I've-
of you?
It's all I've got in front of me, yeah.
Really? That you can't give us anything
been
more
asked and
recently than
answered, I
term 3 data?
Yeah, so I've got a 1 delay in the term data I've got, but I'm happy to come straight back to the
Well, it's not. It's with respect. It's about a term and a half delay. It's early term 3, and we're now nearly at the end of term 4.
Sure.
I just find it bizarre you couldn't give it to me today. We knew you were coming here. So that data's
Time's
not
expired.
available.
Yeah.
Time's expired.
No,
Okay.
I'd really like to help, but that's all I've got in front of me. Unfortunately, Mr. Rumming is ill and wasn't able to join us. Maybe he had the data, but that's all I've got in front of me.
Okay. Well, we'll see.
Okay, order. Mr. Martin, were you trying to say
I'm
something?
not sure, but can I just place on record, that's what I've got. Again, I don't want the committee to think I'm withholding any information.
I
That's
think
what
you
I've
could
got.
have
Okay,
So I'm
order.
happy to come
All right,
back.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Just a correction, Chair, that the terms of reference for the disability review are public and on the NESA website, and there will be a public report in relation to the disability review that you questioned earlier.
Excellent.
And I also indicated that the consultation on dance, drama and music was the 24th of October, and in fact it was the 28th.
Thank you very much. Does the government have any questions?
Unless there's any issues to which the panel...
Thanks,
wanna
Chair. Can I
offer
just
some
correct one
clarifications?
reference?
Please.
Earlier I said that there was a United Nations report into the work we'd done around targets. I meant to say the OECD, and I got the United Nations mixed up with the OECD. So the record should say OECD.
Thank you.
Otherwise, no other questions.
Okay, well, in that case, that brings us to the end of our session. Thank you very much for attending. We do appreciate it. To the extent there were questions taken on notice or any supplementary questions, the Committee Secretary will be in touch. But that concludes our session for today. Thank you.
Thank you.